for approval to take off is inferior in Manila compared to other services which operate out of Australia?
I'm saying that the record of the Qantas Group is very good in safety-sensitive areas, and then I'm saying that when you break the chain of direct control, and if you examine any accidents that happen around the world with aircraft, there's often a break in the chain of control. And what we say is that if you wish to have a situation where you don't break the chain of control, then you try and keep those sort of jobs that are safety sensitive under your direct control.
But on Senator Xenophon's point, those operations are compliant with CASA regulations and obviously audited by CASA. I presume they are.
Chair, my final question is again further to what Senator Edwards asked. So the relevant questions, tell me if I'm wrong here, the relevant questions to ask of CASA and indeed the ATSB would be, to what extent is there supervision of load control operations? Has there been a difference in load control incidents since there's been outsourcing, and if so, what is that difference? And a definitional issue as to what a load control incident is and whether the benchmark for a load control incident has stayed the same over the years.
I think those will be good questions to ask.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Xenophon. Senator Eggleston, do you have any questions? I know Senator Cameron has a couple. Okay. Senator Eggleston.
Just in short, looking at the Services Union summary, you basically, in your submission, are concerned by, I gather, Qantas's offshore practices and the effect on Australian employment and safety issues, and that's what you've just been talking about. But what do your concerns extend to, say, an overseas international owned subsidiary of Qantas, such as a Jetstar operation out of Singapore, registered in Singapore as a Singapore corporation, or in any other Asian country?
I think that if they fly to Australia, then we've got to be careful about who flies here and how we monitor them. I certainly, as an Australian Union, we are concerned about Australian jobs, and we think it's important that we have high-skilled jobs in Australia. Am I concerned about things like IT being offshore? Yes. I mean, IT jobs are high-skilled, very valuable jobs for Australia, and we are concerned about it. So are call centre jobs, and those are the points that we make. We say that Jetstar has offshored its call centre jobs to Manila. That's Jetstar Australia. Jetstar Airways does not have a call centre here in Australia, and we say that they're important jobs for women in this country, and we believe that they should be in Australia. That's our view.
Okay, but I have a few accounts with various companies and so on, and I always I pick up on strange accents and ask what part of India they're in, or the Philippines, or whatever. I wouldn't, but we do know where you're from, so it's not a mystery.
Most pilots we know where you're from, Senator Cameron, on that.
But what I'm trying to say is that it's a very common practice to have offshore call centres. Even, for example, iiNet, which is an internet company which I use, I rang up them one night about a problem, and there was a distinctly South African voice on the phone, and I said, "How long have you been in South Africa, in Australia?" Just, because she'd helped me very much, and she said, "I'm in Cape Town." So that these call centres have an international sort of base in many cases. So, are you arguing that Qantas alone should have its call centre in Australia, and not follow the precedent set by many other Australian countries and have them offshore?
Senator, what I'd say is this. There are two very large international carriers that do not fly to Australia and have call centres based in Australia. That would be Lufthansa, and they have a centre called Global Telesales, which is based in Melbourne.
Just what I'm so sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
Because of the sensitivities at the moment, none of us are allowed to be paired, and we have to attend the chamber for a division, so we won't be long. Thank you. So, so unfortunately we'll have to suspend for a short while.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Southern Broadcasting, I do apologise. Thank you very much. In continuation to Ms White, Senator Eggleston.
Thank you very much. You also on your submission support the Qantas sale bill, noting in particular support for its Qantas subsidiaries and associated entities to have their principal operations located in Australia. Why do you say that? In general terms, that surely if Qantas wishes to set up a subsidiary based and incorporated in an Asian country, since we're actually talking about that area, should they not be able to do so? Many other Australian companies do that sort of thing.
I don't think I finished my other answer, but if I could answer that, the previous answer, and then I'll go to that one. I didn't answer you in relation to the call centre. You asked me about call centres, and I was in the middle of saying yes.
There was discussion about call centres, and my question really was, since so many Australian companies do have internationally based call centres, why shouldn't Qantas be able to? And
I was about to advise you, Senator, that there are two international airlines, Air France KLM and Lufthansa, neither of whom currently fly passenger flights to Australia, who do both have large call centres in Australia. They do that because of the time factor, and that, so one is located in Melbourne, and that trades under the name Global Telesales, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Lufthansa, and the other one is an Air France KLM centre, and that's based in Sydney. And they do so because of the unique talents and mix of population that we have in Australia. And what we have in Australia is people, so Global Telesales does its Asian flight work here in Melbourne because Melbourne has a unique combination of Mandarin, Japanese, German and English speakers, and so they've located it. And similarly for KLM Air France, again, French speakers, German speakers, Mandarin and Japanese. Those speakers, and so they have decided that they want to put their call centres here. And so as the union, one of the larger unions in call centres, we say, well, why wouldn't an Australian company want to have its call centres in Australia to deal with Asia when we are, Asia is our patch. We have a population that can provide great customer service, and we can build that expertise. And the industry of call centres has grown exponentially in Australia. It's a great employer of women and young people, and we think that good Australian companies should support Australian jobs in these areas. In relation to the other question about head offices, again, IT is, head offices have got IT, accounts people, and airline specialists. Airlines have those sort of jobs, which are great jobs for young Australians and for old Australians as well. And we take the view that if we have the population and the skills in this country to have those jobs, then we should have those jobs. And that's where we come from. We think that, and we certainly we think if we are going to be a bigger player in Asia, then we're better to start than with having head offices of Australian, even if not fully owned companies in Australia. That's our view.
Well, thank you very much. I simply asked you your view, and also with respect to call centres, that if that's your view, that's your view. I'm not going to argue with you about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Eggleston. Senator Cameron.
Thanks, Ms White. Ms White, how long have you been involved in industrial relations with Qantas?
I started in 1997 doing airlines with Qantas.
And in your submission you draw attention to the difference between the CEO then, Jeff Dixon's statement in relation to employees, and then and that was in 2004, and now in 2011 the attitude has changed quite dramatically, where employees are not seen in the same context in the report. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, yeah.
And what are the implications that you're drawing there?
Well, I think it builds on what I've just said about Australian jobs. These jobs are, and having jobs, these are very good jobs. Maintenance, administration jobs are great jobs for Australians, and we see that, and there are great Australians performing those jobs, and we see that is an integral part of the airline, and we can compete anywhere in the world, and that we should be doing that, and that should be the attitude. And what we can see is it's been, by having Australian jobs, it's one of the most profitable airlines in the world. It's got one of the greatest safety records of any airline in the world, and I guess if it ain't broke, why change it? That's our view.
Mm-hmm. Have you heard of the saying a virtual airline?
I have heard that, and it has certainly, where a virtual airline is where an airline outsources its functions and has very few functions internally. And the point I was trying to make, I guess, before is that when you start breaking the chain of control in something that is so safety sensitive as an airline, and you do that being a virtual airline, you increase the risks.
Yeah. So a virtual airline is also, you can have the Qantas logo basically on a plane, but that's where it really starts and ends. It's a branding is distinct from being an airline that owns the aeroplanes, employs the employees. That's another aspect of virtual airlines, isn't it?
It is. Certainly, it looks like it's the company, but it actually isn't, because it's a step away. At least sometimes it can, be multiple steps away.
So, given your experience, back in the late 90s to now, do you have a concern that Qantas the strategy might be to eventually become a virtual airline?
I do have those concerns. I have concerns that a more outsourcing, offshoring, or distance from the main company that you have, you just add more risks, and I do have a concern.
And do you think the changes that are being proposed by Senator Xenophon would be sufficient to stop Qantas becoming a virtual airline?
I think that the point I was trying to make was that earlier is that the head office definition is not fantastic in the Qantas Sale Act. It depends on what you define as head office. If it's just the 9th floor of Building A at Qantas in Coward Street, Sydney, then it wouldn't suffice. But I do think it goes some way, and I think including the subsidiaries is certainly an important point, because there are significant numbers of subsidiaries. Yeah.
Qantas have been, in my experience, and you and I have been union officials working together at the ACTU with responsibilities for Qantas. My experience with Qantas has been they've been fairly predictable in their industrial relations over a number of years. They've been really, really tough. They've continued to give significant increases to their executives, and they've said to the employees, there's always a crisis, and you have to shoulder the burden of the crisis. You do that, but not the executives. Is my analysis pretty right there?
They are very tough to deal with. It is very difficult to deal with them, and it is certainly, and I've seen it over a long period of time, over a number of, the airline industry is a tough industry, but they are tough, and I've seen certainly what comes to mind is when the when 9/11 occurred in 2001. the staff took 0% pay rises, and in a circumstance where Qantas wrote profits that year and were always going to. And so I do see the shift.
Yeah. And when I say they were fairly predictable, they were predictably tough. And they've got a very sophisticated industrial relations team, haven't they?
Yes, I'd agree with that.
They've got an internal industrial relations team.
They have an internal industrial relations team and an external team.
And the external team has got quite a reputation for taking pretty tough, uncompromising stands and providing pretty good advice as to how to diminish the union's capacity on the job.
I've never seen their advice, but I guess I've been at the end of it. Certainly have had tough times over the period that I've been employed doing this work, and what comes to mind was internal competitive tendering where people had to bid for their jobs. Those things are things that are certainly scarred on my memory.
Yeah, they were tough but pretty predictable.
Chair, can you ask Ms White to make it clear which of Senator Cameron's statements she's agreeing with or not?
I can do that for you, Senator Fisher. Without repeating what Senator Fisher said, Ms White, would you like to answer the question?
Tough and predictable.
Yeah. So therefore, when the Chief Executive said that he woke up on a Saturday morning and decided to throw the travelling public in Australia into chaos, and he decided to stop any Qantas flights, and he just woke up that morning and decided to do that, that's not consistent with their modus operandi over the years, is it?
I've always found Qantas to be a highly planned organisation over a long period of time. We have seen significant changes over a long period of time and large changes, and I've never known them to not have a significant plan.
Yeah.
That I've witnessed and members have been subject to.
Yeah, and I agree with that. That's my experience with Qantas, and that's why I found that we can't contemplate what was in Mr. Joyce's mind when he decided to turn into a rogue employer, but he did that, and that wouldn't have been consistent with their operations over the years. Let me just.
Senator Cameron, I just bring attention to the time through no fault of Ms White's, but I will have to get you to wrap up soon so I can make other senators.
Okay. Qantas have got a number of visions and values that they say they stand by. One is transparency and honesty. Has that vision and value been strengthening within Qantas or weakening?
That's hard to say. I think because I have a long horizon, I think it goes up and down over a period of time. Yeah. It might be at a lower ebb now than previously, but it might have been at that ebb before.
Yeah. Well, I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Cameron. Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Chair.
Ms White, you refer to the befores, the days of Margaret Jackson in your evidence and Jeff Dixon. In 2004, we've had a significant event since then called the GFC. It's changed governments, thinking towards everything, and business has never been the same since, and then some places haven't recovered. Do you think that there may be a change in the airline industry across the world by virtue of that?
I thought you guys said it was a North American crisis didn't hit here. That's good, I like that.
I always encourage active debate.
I didn't.
But Senator Cameron, you are out of order. Senator Edwards has the call.
Senator, over the horizon, of which I have a long horizon, I've seen lots of fairly tough things. Okay, so 9/11, that caused a significant number of airlines to close. I've seen SARS. We've significant numbers of members in Singapore Airlines and Asian carriers that fly here.
In the interest of time, so
okay, well,
it's a vastly different place.
All right, well, what I'd say to you is that the airline industry has had lots of different things happen to it, and I don't think now is any different to a whole series of other things that have happened, and in particular, the time in 2001 when 9/11 occurred. That was just capture.
I think I hear Senator Edwards, but I think it is important in the context of Senator Edwards' questions that you do finish the examples you were using for those that have had a very active involvement in the aviation industry understand, but for those of us on the outside probably didn't quite understand the effects of some of the examples you were quoting. So I'd encourage you just to continue on your line of answering.
So bird flu. Okay, so bird flu had a situation, particularly here. The breakout of bird flu stopped people from flying. SARS stopped people from flying. 9/11 stops people from flying. The economic circumstance. But if I had to compare where we are now compared to where we were in 2001, where a series of carriers closed their doors, in Europe in particular, I don't think we're in exactly the same position then. The airline industry is different depending on the rules, and I look at what has happened subsequently in the US. Probably the US carriers are stronger than they've ever been because they've consolidated. So I think I don't think that it is. So my answer, looking historically, is I don't think it's any worse now than it has been over the time frame that I have been working in. In fact, Qantas has made profits every year.
Do you agree that it's a vastly different place economically and globally for airlines than it was in 2004, which you gave evidence on?
I don't think I do. I don't think I do agree. I think that Qantas has made profits every year, including when all those airlines closed in 2001, and it has done extraordinarily well, and it is one of the top performing airlines in the world as against any measure.
And we'll move on. The collective agreement that you refer to on telesales agents with Qantas and the disparity between Australia and New Zealand that you give in your evidence, have you done that with other airlines? Have you made the comparison? Because it's about 25%, isn't it?
I have other airlines that have telephone sales
located offshore in other countries as well as in their home country.
I haven't done it with. I might have done it a while back over global telesales, but I can't tell you what that.
So, but your union represents participates with other airlines as well?
It does. So we have, if I look at other carriers, Emirates. We have Emirates as a call centre here in one of its global centres in Melbourne. As I said, Air France, KLM does, so does...
So do you have any evidence, anecdotal or otherwise, of what their comparison differential extra cost is to operate in Australia compared to other countries?
I think the only analysis I would have done, which is aged, is about global telesales.
Okay. Are you working with Qantas on this? I mean, 25% less by just being across, excuse the pun, across the ditch to operate, which is not far away, is a significant issue for your union, and it would be one that, are you trying to address that with Qantas and management?
We're addressing it with what? Addressing cutting the rates here in Australia?
No, I don't know. I mean, you tell me. I don't work in your world. About 25% to a management in business is a significant saving.
It is. It is a significant saving. We are working with the union in New Zealand. They are probably under the rates of New Zealand call centres, and so we're working with them
to lift the rates of pay in New Zealand commensurate with the Australians.
We're hoping to we're trying to assist them, certainly.
Okay. Given the time constraints, I'll secede to...
Thanks, Senator. With Senator Fisher.
Thank you. I think I understood you to be agreeing with Senator Cameron's leading questions from the inquiry table about Qantas being tough and predictable. If that's so, then did your union foresee Qantas's grounding of planes, and if not, do you know why not?
Do not foresee.
If you can answer that, can you give me the winner for the third at Flemington on Saturday? Sorry, a bit of light-hearted, let's get into it.
Senator, I felt something was up. I've done bargaining with Qantas for a while, for a very long time, since 1997, as I've said, and I felt that some change was coming. I felt that earlier this year that something different was in the air, but what I couldn't pinpoint.
I suppose, or not in the air. Once the planes were grounded, that was a pretty poor pun, wasn't it? In terms of your response to Senator Xenophon, I understood you to be saying that you thought it would have been appropriate for Qantas to have given your union notice of grounding of planes, and I presume also, had it unfolded this way, notice of lockout. Is that right?
Well, we weren't locked out, Senator. We're not currently in bargaining.
Okay,
our members are at the front line, so they're the check-in people at airports. They're also on in telephone sales. And what I think the Senator asked me was, should the government have been advised about this, and should there have been further notice? And my answer to that was that because it's such a significant part of the Australian economy, that it seemed to me a reasonable thing to tell the government and others that this was about to happen.
And would the others include your union?
I think to tell the employees, they were under extraordinary pressure because they're at the front line. Passengers had nowhere to go and they didn't have anything to say. And the wait times for call centres, the call centre in Hobart was 7 hours. And when you have nothing to tell people who are desperate to know when they're going to get a flight, I think it's reasonable to tell people that it's going to happen.
So who are the others who should have been notified of the grounding, and by whom? By the government? Once Qantas had told them, who are you saying should have told whom?
I think it would be reasonable for Qantas to tell its passengers or give them notice about what they were going to do. They got no notice. I think it's reasonable to tell their employees. I think it's reasonable to tell the government and to give them notice. I don't think, when it's of your own making, and bearing in mind that customer service people have things that are grounding of aircraft not of their making, for instance, the Volcano grounded, you can't give them notice, but if it's of your own making, it would seem
So you're not including your union in one of the parties that should have been notified?
Well, the union is a group of employees who work for the airline, where the union is employees, and so if you notify the employees
are your union's members, aren't they? They're not the union itself, are they?
Oh, well, they are. The union would be nothing without the employees.
But the employees alone don't constitute your union.
Well, groups of employees constitute our union.
Okay, so had your union, through its employee members, been given advance notice of the grounding of planes, what action would your union have taken?
I guess we would have consulted, as we do. When we get consulted, the union and the union's members get consulted about significant change and issues that occur constantly. And if I would put that in that bag, we would say what we think about that and how it could be mitigated and what things could have been done. More staff, for instance. More staff to deal with the inquiries. If there's a 7-hour wait for passengers wanting information, those people who are at the front line getting that, responding to that information, are under the pump. More customer service agents to deal with the passengers who are displaced. More people rostered on to do that work.
So your union wouldn't have taken any action to, say, for example, frustrate the grounding of planes?
I'm not sure what action we could have taken.
Maybe not. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Fisher. If there are no further questions, Ms. Wall apologise about the break halfway through your evidence, but we do thank you and the ASU. And we now call Virgin Australia.
Thank you.
done it right. What room are you in? What room are you in? Okie dokie. All right, I welcome representatives from Virgin Australia, and we do sincerely thank you for coming today, and we know that you did put yourself out last time, but time constraints didn't let it happen, so thank you very much. For the Hansard record, could you please give your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Jane McKeon, Group Executive Government Relations for Virgin Australia.
Nick Mare, General Manager, Workplace Relations.
Just come closer to the microphone, please.
Nick Mare, General Manager, Workplace Relations.
Thank you.
And Skip Fulton, Project Management Specialist for Safety Systems, Virgin Australia.
Thank you very much. Now, Virgin have lodged submission 5 with the committee. Do you wish to make any amendments or changes to your submission?
No, thank you, Senator.
Okay, on that then, Ms McKeon, I'm going to invite you to make a brief opening statement before we go to questions.
Thank you, Senator Sterle. The Virgin Australia Group of Airlines employs over 7,400 people, approximately 93% of whom are based in Australia. As a business engaged in service delivery, we believe that our employees are our most important asset and that their capabilities provide us with a significant advantage in the highly competitive aviation industry. Virgin Australia is proud of its positive workplace culture and strong levels of staff engagement, developed through a collaborative approach to engaging with employees and unions. We strive to achieve industrial relations outcomes in which fair terms and conditions are balanced with productivity and operational flexibility. Our recent successful negotiations with unions representing long-haul international pilots and cabin crew, and the fact that the group has not experienced any industrial action to date, highlight the effectiveness of this approach. In May, we announced that all of the airlines of the Virgin Blue Group would be rebranded as Virgin Australia by the end of this year. Virgin Australia's philosophy, as an Australian-based airline, is focused on the maintenance and creation of employment opportunities for Australians by undertaking as many activities as possible locally. We are of the view that in many cases, provided there is sufficient scale, the additional costs associated with performing activities on shore will be offset by productivity gains and logistical efficiencies. Virgin Australia performs the majority of our maintenance in Australia, and contrary to views expressed by other submitters, this includes a heavy maintenance of some of our aircraft. With the establishment of a new Virgin Australia maintenance facility in Sydney by early 2014, 300 new Australian jobs will be created, further increasing the proportion of our maintenance undertaken onshore. We have also announced that we will transfer to Australia up to 100 call centre roles currently performed overseas.
Sorry, how many?
100 call centre roles currently performed overseas, and establish a pilot cadetship program in partnership with SkyWest. Yesterday we announced that we would establish up to a further 250 cabin crew jobs in Sydney by June next year. These activities contribute to the achievement of the goal noted in the National Aviation Policy White Paper that employment in aviation should grow, with more Australians training for and taking up jobs in the industry. As outlined in our submission, we expect that the Air Navigation and Civil Aviation Amendment Aircraft Crew Bill 2011 could impact several areas of our operations, notwithstanding the approaches we adopt in relation to industrial relations and safety for our aircraft crew. We are concerned that the bill appears to seek to achieve an industrial outcome through laws which are, with the exception of relevant safety issues, unrelated to industrial matters. In particular, the bill, if enacted, would significantly limit our ability to remain competitive in the market served by our Pacific Blue operations, could jeopardise core elements of our strategy of developing a global network with our alliance partners such as Air New Zealand, Delta Airlines, Etihad Airways and Singapore Airlines, and also put at risk our objective of expanding operations to regional Australia in conjunction with SkyWest. In the area of safety, Virgin Australia incorporates fatigue risk management systems into our group safety management system, although there is no legislative requirement for us to do so. Our fatigue risk management systems determine the duty limitations and rest requirements of both our flight and cabin crew and represent an important component of Virgin Australia's commitment to the safety of our guests and our employees. We lead the Australian aviation industry in this area as the only Australian high-capacity regular public transport operator to have implemented a CASA-approved fatigue risk management system. In closing, we believe that Virgin Australia fulfils an important role in the Australian aviation industry as a strong second carrier in a country for which safe and reliable air transport services are critical for economic prosperity and social cohesion. Our strategy is designed to capitalise on growth opportunities both in Australia and overseas, and our scope to do this in a competitive manner will directly support our ability to provide a high-quality experience for our guests, a stable and rewarding work environment for our employees, and sustainable returns for our shareholders. Against this background, Virgin Australia welcomes the committee's inquiry into the bill, and my colleagues and I would be very happy to take any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Ms McKeon, and you'll table your opening statement for us. Thank you very much. And before I go to Senator Gallagher, I did read your submission where you're heavily supportive of enterprise bargaining in all facets of your business. Can I just direct you to your, say, ramp services, baggage handling, freight and catering operations? Do you, or does Virgin, outsource?
Yes, we do. We have a mixture. So we don't perform catering in-house, as an example. That's an outsourced function. In terms of the baggage handling services, overwhelmingly conducted in-house for the major ports, but in some of the regional ports, for example, we have outsourced models as well, and that's, I guess, a model that would go across the group.
So I don't get confused. So predominantly in the major ports is in-house. Does that mean there is a bit of outsourcing?
Yes. So we also have outsourced models in the major ports, and that's by and large for top-up labour, if I put it that way.
Just tell me what that sort of, is that a labour hire company? Is it a contractor? What might it be, Mr. Lemay?
That's right. So it's one of the existing major, a couple of the existing major ground handling companies who also provide services to us to supplement our direct employees. Okay, and do they wear Virgin uniforms or are they in another uniform? Yes, they do. They do, okay. Would you be able to provide, and I'm very mindful you may want to take this on notice, but the breakup of the ports as to your own in-house for baggage handling ramp services as compared to the outsourcing? To give you the specifics, I'd have to take it on notice. That's right. Again, for Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, the overwhelming majority are engaged directly, and by that it's in excess of 80%. We're talking for the regional ports. So when you're getting up into the more regional areas, we're more likely in those ports where we don't have the frequency in and out to engage a contractor. And Broom's a classic example, and I do understand that, and that's fine. And if you wish to take on notice too, if it's possible to see the difference of the comparison of pay rates, outsourcing compared to in-house for those functions that are performed? There is a difference, but as a principle, you don't necessarily have the detail around what your contractor pays to its employees. What we know is that we pay rates that are in the ballpark of obviously the market, and so do the contracted parties that we engage. Now, we all have different employment arrangements, different collective agreements, but they're all measured against the same underlying award and subject to the same regulatory system. So, yes, there are differences, but it's not particularly material.
Well, probably is for this bill, because it would be interesting to see if there is a vast difference, Mr. Legrand. Now, I'm not trying to snooker you into a major public slapdown where you might not be telling me the truth. I don't know that. Not for 1 minute, I'm not suggesting that. But it would be very helpful if you could supply that information, because the experience that, and certainly my experience, is outsourcing genuine labour peak and trough periods. You need casuals and you need that flexibility. We fully understand that. The fear I have for Australian jobs is one thing, but if we're negotiating, if the unions are negotiating for and on behalf of your full-time employees who are their members for wonderful terms and conditions of employment, it's all very well having those negotiations, but if no one's going to be employed under that agreement and we're out, and the company starts outsourcing, well, then we're wasting everyone's time. That's all I'm suggesting. I'm not suggesting Virgin and doing that for 1 minute, but you did, in your submission, make it very clear that you are predominantly, or you do employ and negotiate terms and conditions with the employees under collective agreements, so to strengthen your argument. So if you could take that on notice for us, please. And may I ask you, Mr. Lemaire, is the view of Virgin as we sit here today that the preference for your employees in baggage and freight handling ramp services as such is for in-house where it can be in-house? I understand, leave the regional ports out. So on your major ports.
The preference is to perform the work in-house where we can do so, and the trend that you've seen over the life of the company has seen a steady increase in direct employees in all the areas to which you've asked me for, and that's the proof, if you like, of the strategy.
Okay. Now, with the 250 cabin crew, I think you said in Sydney by next July, that will be to supplement existing domestic cabin crew, so it's an expansion.
That's correct. It is.
Okay. And they will be direct Virgin employees, will they? Okay, not outsourced.
No, they'll be direct Virgin employees.
On that then, thank you very much, because I am mindful of the time constraints. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. McKeon, just in the interest of actually assisting us hard-working secretariat here who get miles of transcript, I just want to go through the Air Navigation Act 1920 and Civil Aviation Act 1988 in relation to aircraft crew and related purposes. So basically it's very short. You're familiar with the amendments that are being sought?
Yes.
So if I was just to ask you, and you may take it on notice or you may have already answered in your submission, but I just want to be very specific about the 16A2. It is a condition of the licence to which this section applies that the holder of the licence must ensure that flight crew and cabin crew working in connection with a scheduled international air service of the holder of the licence who are directly employed by the holder of the licence receive wages and conditions of employment that are no less favourable than they would have received had they been directly employed by the holder. Does that cause an immediate impact on your operations? Now, I'm not asking you to agree to it, I'm just asking you, does that impact on your operations as we stand here today?
It would, Senator, and I think the three key areas where it could have a potential impact is, as I outlined in our opening statement, our Pacific Blue operation, which is based in New Zealand, our strategy of partnering with international airlines in order to build an international network. We do operate some international services with our own aircraft.
So just to my understanding, that would include, say, a code share flight which would have a Etihad crew operating domestically in Australia, or
no, internationally?
Only internationally.
Internationally, that's correct. And the third element would be the alliance with SkyWest, WA-based SkyWest Airlines, who are operating with their aircraft and crew some of our regional services with the new turboprop aircraft that we have had come into our fleet.
Are they operating internationally? Skywards?
No, I don't believe so, just domestically.
They actually do have one international route, and that's from...
I'll do that. Is that sorry? I stand corrected, Senator. Thank you.
In fact, the second one from Port Gibbon to Denpasar.
Have you called it? Have you called it?
No. And I suppose just for clarification, 16B, foreign subsidiaries of an Australian airline. Have you set up a foreign-owned subsidiary that's operating in a manner that would be caught by this entity, or is that Pacific Blue?
That's Pacific Blue. That's right. So Pacific Blue is a New Zealand-based but 100% owned by Virgin Australia subsidiary. Yeah. So that would be caught by the proposed amendments.
Yeah. And what about the final session, which includes conditions of employment, including flight and duty time limitations? Is there any implication there? I mean, do those people work different hours to what's allowed in Australia?
It's the same point in Australia. So the New Zealand operation with Pacific Blue has flight and duty time limitations that are governed by the New Zealand CAA.
Yeah.
They are currently required to abide by those rules.
Yeah.
And the Australian network is governed by the FRMS, the fatigue risk management system that we have in Australia. So the proposed amendment would potentially imply that a New Zealand-based crew would be required to meet the standards that we have in Australia, as opposed to those governed by...
flying in New Zealand?
Correct.
Well, what if they were flying in Australia? That'd be okay. So, they don't fly in Australia.
They don't fly in Australia. They only fly internationally.
Okay. Well, as I say, I'm just trying to get some clarification on the actual impact of these. So, going to the AOC, what is that, aircraft operating certificate? Mm-hmm. And that would be the procedural amendment, Nick, would it, in the civil aviation? Yeah. So we really, the Qantas Sales Act's nothing to do with you, but I'd just like to ask you a couple of questions in general terms. What is the percentage of maintenance that's carried out by Virgin Australia in Australia? Is there a figure, or is it?
Yes, currently it's approximately 83% of our maintenance activities are carried out in Australia.
And that's an economic choice, obviously. You can do your maintenance anywhere in the world, so you choose to do it in Australia because that's the most economic place to do it, or?
And logistics comes into it. Obviously, most of our fleet is based in Australia. Also, number of aircraft in the fleet. So, for example, we do perform our 777 maintenance in Los Angeles. We only have 5 of those aircraft in the fleet. We don't have a critical mass of those aircraft at this stage that would enable us to, for example, establish an in-house facility. But certainly in relation to the Sydney hangar that I mentioned earlier, we anticipate doing more of our 737 work and also the A330s, which have just been recently introduced into our fleet. We will have a critical mass of those, which will enable us to perform more of that maintenance in Australia than we currently do.
Okay. So I just want to, obviously this inquiry started out with the purpose of examining these 2 bills and amendments, and events, unbelievable events overtook us, and the whole inquiry's gathered a lot of evidence in respect to other matters. So I just have a couple of questions which I'm happy if you need to take on notice, or if you can answer them, that's fine. Basically, do you know off the top of your head what the age of your fleet is?
Yes, it is currently 4.9 years, and by, I think, June next year it will be 4.1, but I can let you know towards...
So if I've done a bit of looking on the internet, and there's a planespotters.com, they're about the same figures are they basically accurate figures? Are you aware of planespotters.com?
Yes.
Yeah, and they would be accurate figures for your fleet, roundabout?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who is the AOC holder in Virgin? The licensed person?
Sean Donoghue. Yes, who is our group executive for operations, who reports directly to our CEO, Mr. Borghetti.
Okay, that's pretty important. So, and this is the curly question. In the event of a serious safety event or issue, can you describe a procedure or protocol which would be taken should the CEO decide to shut down the operation of Virgin in Australia and its international flights?
Senator, we would have to take that question on notice.
Because just to be the AOC holder and the CEO, I'm just wanting to understand how that actually works, because from my limited knowledge of the subject, the AOC holder is the one who actually signs the certificate to say there's a problem.
I would expect that there would be some consultation, but as to the exact nature of the process...
Well, let's hope it never happens, but I think everybody would benefit by knowing what the protocol is in the event of
certainly
something like this coming about. No, that's all my questions, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Gallagher. Senator Eggleston.
Yes, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions, mostly about so-called offshoring. Tell me about load control being offshored. I don't quite understand how that happens and how it works.
I might ask Mr Fulton to make some comments, but in terms of where our load control is performed, it is performed in Brisbane, principally from our head office. I think Sydney is performed at the moment at Sydney Airport, but that will come online to Brisbane with the other load control activities in the first quarter of next year. For services that depart from overseas airports, the load control is performed locally by the airport, the ground handling agent. Would you like to add?
That's correct. You absolutely confused me. You were shaking in the negative and said that's correct.
Sorry. That is correct. All Virgin Australia load control is conducted in Australia by direct employees. All of our long-haul flying, when the aircraft departs for Los Angeles, for example, it is performed by our ground handling provider in that airport.
So when you say it's not a matter of having load control at individual airports. So is that correct? Load control is done how is it done? Looking at an aircraft and deciding where weight should be distributed.
Correct. So a load controller
in some computerised way somewhere. Can you just explain it for the benefit of us poor senators who don't understand these things?
So the individual performing that function would look at the number of passengers that have checked in and the number of bags, together with any freight load that may be carried. They then look at the distribution of that load across the aircraft using a computer system, and then based on that, that's used to guide the ramp staff on how they load the aircraft and guide the flight crew on how they prepare for the performance of that aircraft. That function can be performed either locally at the airport or at a centralised location, which is how we do it with Virgin Australia in Brisbane.
All right, and previous witness talked about some problems with aircraft taking off from Melbourne and load control. There's no problem about load control not being actually performed in the grounds of the airport from which an aircraft's leaving. It can be done anywhere in effect when you know the numbers of passengers, weights, baggage, etc.
That is correct. The function can be performed remotely.
Now I understand that Pacific Blue, which is one of your either subsidiaries or a subsidiary, which is based in New Zealand, and it says it's based there on competitive grounds. What does that mean?
Pacific Blue was established in 2004 by the then Virgin Blue, and the principal reason was to enable us to compete effectively in the New Zealand market, bearing in mind that the principal operators on the Trans-Tasman were in New Zealand, and also Jet Connect, which had been established by Qantas over in New Zealand in 2002. So in order to compete effectively on that market, which is very price sensitive, we established Pacific Blue. So we have 525 employees based over there at present. That number has actually represents a decline from the past couple of years. But I suppose I would note that there was no transfer of work that occurred in setting up that base. We did it purely to be able to compete with the fares that were being offered in the marketplace by other operators.
What are there differences in wages, standard wages in Australia and New Zealand?
There are differentials, and I might ask Mr. Lemire to comment on that.
Yeah, there certainly are. So, obviously it ranges across the groups, but there is a material difference between the take-home pay of somebody based in New Zealand and somebody based in Australia.
You can provide the committee with that information, Mr. Lemire?
Yes, we can do so.
Okay, thank you. If that assists, Senator Eggleston.
Thank you very much. I think that does assist. Now, do any flights originating in New Zealand come to Australia and take Australian passengers to other destinations internationally?
Our Pacific Blue flights operate Trans-Tasman. We then do have some Pacific Blue aircraft and crew that are deployed on services from Australia to destinations in the Southwest Pacific, yes.
Not in Asia, though, is that what you're saying? In the Southwest Pacific. So that would mean Vanuatu, New Caledonia, places like that?
Yes, Vanuatu, Fiji. But, for instance, Phuket and Denpasar, some of those destinations, they are operated by Virgin Australia aircraft and crews.
Okay, so you don't... Where I'm going is, are you using New Zealand lower wages or crewing with people paid or managing the flight with people paid on New Zealand wages to come to Australia and then move on to other destinations, so that in fact you have a lower cost base but are charging Australian level fares?
I think that the fares that we're charging on some of those services, we are competing with airlines based in Southwest Pacific countries who do have cost bases that are much lower than Australian operators. So again, that is something that we are doing on competitive grounds. However, I would say those services are quite limited.
Would you like to give us some examples, either directly now or on notice of those kind of services?
I'd be very happy to provide some examples on notice.
All right, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Senator Eggleston. Senator Xenophon.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just go to the reason why I introduced this bill that you've commented on is as a result of complaints I've had from Jetstar crew. And I think the nub of the complaint is that there were crew based in overseas bases, Bangkok, for instance, where those crew would spend most of their time within Australia, either flying in and out of Australia and flying on flights that were tagged as international flights, but which they considered to be effectively domestic flights. That's what's been put to me by some cabin crew. And also that the terms and conditions, particularly in relation to fatigue, were different, that the contracts, they allowed duty extensions that were far beyond that for Australian-based crew. What's your policy? How do you deal with that? I mean, Polynesian Blue is, 49% owned by the Virgin Group here, 49% by the Samoan government and 2% by Aggie Grays, the hotel. How do you deal with that? I mean, how do we know, or what processes do you have in place so that if someone is based at an overseas base, they're flying here for the purposes of the international flights rather than being used as cheap domestic labour? And of course I should say that Mr Buchanan disputes that, and not to be fair to him, but that's the complaint that's been put to me.
And we do not as a group operate any domestic tag services from international services. I should clarify that, unlike the Qantas group. In terms of the protocols around that, are you able to comment?
Correct. We do not operate tag flights. So our international operations in New Zealand Southwest Pacific are operated by Pacific Blue. The New Zealand-based crew operating under the New Zealand AOC. If you get on a flight domestically within Australia, you're on a Virgin Australia aircraft with Virgin Australia crew. We do not use foreign-based crew as part of the Virgin Australia network through tag flying, as an example of what you just said.
But for instance, New Zealand-based crew, if they're doing the Trans-Tasman, would it be what rules are there in place, or what are your practices in terms of a New Zealand-based crew overnighting here? I mean, do they spend more time here than in New Zealand, or how
From
does
a
it work?
fatigue risk management perspective?
Yeah.
So both Pacific Blue in New Zealand and Virgin Australia both operate fatigue risk management systems. Both programs are approved by the respective regulators, and there are provisions for minimum rest and maximum duty hours under both systems, and they are both very similar systems. They are not exactly identical because of the different regulatory programs, but they are very similar.
Are your contracts different in the sense that are there different duty extension rules and requiring people to be on standby compared to, say, New Zealand-based crew, Australian-based crew, or with Polynesian Blue, for instance?
There will be subtle differences between the program that we have here in Australia and the program that we have in New Zealand.
But what about the raw hours? Because one of the allegations put to me about the Jetstar crew based in Bangkok, they could be technically on duty for 22, 23, 24 hours compared to Australian-based crew. That's one of the assertions put to me.
I can take on notice and give you the differential between what applies here in Australia and what applies in Pacific Blue.
Can I just go to one of the arguments put by the Qantas group, and is that it's a tough competitive environment. There's not a level playing field with foreign-based carriers in terms of what they pay their crew, and some of them. Do you have a view how the government might make, or how you might be able to make the international playing field more level?
Are you talking in respect of safety?
No, not safety, but in terms of the argument that you need to survive by having these overseas bases, and Qantas announced their strategy, say, on the basis of having international offshoots. Because they say that the international environment is so tough, clearly that doesn't seem to be the model that Virgin Australia is adopting. But what do you say to that argument that in order to survive you've got to go overseas and set up overseas offshoots?
I think each of these matters are decisions for individual businesses, and we have elected to take our business down a particular strategic path, as I've tried to outline, and obviously the Qantas group has their own strategy, and I'm really not in a position to comment on it.
Sure. In terms of the maximum hours your cabin crew work, what difference is there between, say, Australian-based and New Zealand-based crew?
I don't have the specific details. I know I've got the exact numbers for Australian-based crew.
Sure, if you could.
Yep. So our crew members for cabin crew based in Australia with Virgin Australia can be rostered for 9 hours and 45 minutes. They may also be rostered up to 12 hours if that 12 hours includes a paxing flight.
Right.
On the day, in the event of a disrupt, that crew member may be exceeded up to 12 hours. They can only go beyond that with their approval.
And how often? But is there an upper limit though?
No, it's between the crew member must approve to go beyond the 12 hours.
Okay, but is there an upper limit to, even with the person's approval, how high can it go?
There's no direct upper limit. However, there is an upper limit within the flight crew rules, and by that, as a crew as a whole, the aircraft would not be able to go beyond the flight crew limit.
Which is, what would that be?
There's a matrix depending on the amount of time you can sign on, how many flights you can do. Off the top of my head, I think it's about 13 hours.
Okay,
but I'll take that
it's
on
not as though they could do 18 or 19 hours.
In the long haul environment,
sure, that's different. Yeah.
But in the domestic environment, no. You're correct.
Okay, all right. And that's something. And how close would that be for the New Zealand-based crew and the Polynesian?
I think it would be within 1 or 2 hours.
Okay.
So similar, that they would not be able to extend beyond 12 or 13. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I'll get that for you.
And just finally, Ms McKeon, I think you've said that you set up the New Zealand operations partly in response to the Jet Connect. In order to be competitive, you need to compete with Jet Connect. So basically, it was a race to compete. You needed to keep up with your competitors, and in a sense, do you think you would have set up that overseas offshoot but for Jet Connect?
It's very hard to to comment on the decision, I guess, in hindsight, but competitors in the marketplace are probably, one of the most, if not the most, significant driving factor in terms of making commercial decisions. So it was very much a factor.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Xenophon. Senator Eccleston, are you giving me that look that you'd like to call?
Well, we did ask you about the salaries of cabin staff based in New Zealand and overseas, and you also have call centres, don't you? Do you not, in New Zealand?
No, our call centres, we have a call centre in Brisbane.
Yes.
And we have call centres, outsourced call centres in Kuala Lumpur and Manila. And these are some of the jobs that I talked about. The 100 call centre jobs are being brought back from those overseas call centres.
To be based in Brisbane?
Yes.
So you're not using any New Zealand call centre, but you have got cabin crew based in New Zealand?
And flight crew.
And flight crew, all right.
Correct.
Thank you.
Just on that point, Chair.
Yes, Senator Edwards.
I don't know whether you've seen the evidence from the ASU or you heard the evidence before. I've noticed you were in the room. The collective, the payment for people that operate telesales agents in Qantas was between 40,245 and 45,673. Do you have an equivalent figure in your company for telesales operators in Australia or indeed offshore to make a similar comparison so that we could get some benchmarking?
We'd certainly be happy to provide that on notice.
Okay. And look, you'll have the ability to have a look at the comparison and in that context. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Edwards. Now, just before we let you run away, now this question may be a little bit unfair, but I have to ask it, and I'll ask it of you, Ms McKeon. I'm happy if you flick to your colleagues. Is anyone at the table in the position to comment on the call today from a senior aviation union secretary of a modern award for the aviation industry? Have you heard the call today? You haven't? In that case, then it would be really unfair for me to ask, but oh, what the heck, I will anyway. No, I won't. I'll leave you alone. It would just ambush you. If you said yes, it would probably answer it for me. There's been a call today for an aviation award in the modernisation process, and it's come from Mr Sheldon. As we know, Mr Sheldon has members in your area of freight. He's the Secretary, the National Secretary of the Transport Workers Union, who has significant coverage in freight, baggage handling with Virgin, and he's called for a modern award across the aviation industry. Would that spook Virgin?
It wouldn't spook us, but I guess the response to that would be there are already 3 modern awards that apply to the aviation industry. The full bench has turned its mind to arriving at those 3 to the extent to which those 3 don't cover the workforces upon whom that is advocated. I don't quite understand the point, but we are open to the award system. We participated in the award modernisation process and we're supportive of the system.
And that's a very, very honest and frank answer, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr Mare. But it's certainly, I think it's along the lines, I'm reading the media release, and it's intended to squash the argument that one company has an advantage unfairly over another for the coverage of workers in those award areas. On that, yes, of course, you
with
can.
the contracts, are you able to provide copies of the contracts, even if it has to be on a confidential basis to the committee, just to show the difference between duty extension and hours between the various aspects of the group, including those airlines that you've only got a minority share in?
On that point, just a clarification, if I may. When we're talking about work rules, it's important to bear in mind the distinction between a work rule from a safety or a safety perspective as opposed to the work rules that you negotiate in an industrial context. So we've outlined that our New Zealand-based crew are subject to effectively the New Zealand-based safety law.
Yeah,
The Australian-based crew are subject to the Australian-based safety law. And then that then sets the limit that anybody can work.
But there's no
Within that,
Yeah.
in an industrial context, you quite often negotiate something that is more restrictive on the company. So the example that was given before about a 9 hours 45 or duty limitation for a cabin crew member in Australia is an industrially negotiated maximum limitation that sits within what is a higher duty hour limitation from the safety perspective.
I appreciate that, but my understanding is that CASA is still, I may be wrong on this, but CASA is still formulating duty limitations or for cabin crew in terms of issues of fatigue. That's still subject to, because in terms of the rules that apply to that, they're still looking at, I think, at AKO and other rules, but that will be clarified soon. But there's a combination of both, isn't it? Safety requirements and industrial requirements.
There absolutely is.
Yeah. Thanks.
Senator Gallagher has one more before we thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. What we'd like to do is just put it to you to just return to the specifics of the amendments, and if you can double check that there is no other unintended consequences on your operation, and make sure they're covered off in your submission so that we can arrive at a position on in regards to Virgin.
Certainly happy to do that, Senator.
Thank you.
On that, then, Ms McKeon, to you and your team at Virgin, thank you very much for coming along today, and we do apologise for the muck-up last time. Thank you, and we will now call one of the departments. I think it's Dewar, isn't it? Yes, it is. Dewar officials. Okie dokie. I welcome representatives from the Department of Education, Employment and Workplace Relations. I remind senators that the Senate has resolved that an officer of the Department of the Commonwealth or of a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to a superior or to a minister. This resolution prohibits only questions asking for opinions on matters of policy and does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. Officers of the department are also reminded that any claim that it would be contrary to the public interest to answer a question must be made by a minister and should be accompanied by a statement setting out the basis for the claim. For the Hansard record, could you please give your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
John Kovacic, Deputy Secretary, Workplace Relations and Economic Strategy, Senator.
Thank you.
Jeremy O'Sullivan, Chief Counsel, Workplace Relations Legal. David Bell, Acting Branch Manager, Bargaining and Coverage Branch, Workplace Relations Legal Group.
Thank you. You have lodged, or the department has lodged submission 9 with the committee. Would you like to make any amendments or additions to your submission?
No, Senator. No, Chair, sorry.
Okay. And I'm smiling because it seems strange for the RAP committee to have Dewar in front of us, but I'm sure you feel the same. On that then, I'll invite you to make a brief opening statement, should you wish, Deputy Secretary, before we go to questions.
No, I don't have any opening statement, Chair.
Too easy. Questions, Senator Xenophon.
Thank you. More time for questions then, Chair. Thank you for your submission. I understand that the Fair Work Ombudsman is currently investigating allegations in relation to Thai-based crew on some Jetstar flights, and that's something that can't be commented on. I appreciate that. But in broad terms, how is it policed? How does the department look at and enforce the Fair Work Act in the context of foreign-based crew, they're based overseas, but they spend most of their time here, and if they're working on flights that could be characterised, they're tagged as international flights, but if they could be, but in effect they seem to be domestic flights. They leave from a domestic terminal, they arrive at a domestic terminal. The overwhelming number of their passengers are domestic passengers. How do you get that? How do you determine whether that person would come within the provisions of the Fair Work Act?
Well, Senator, in terms of the issue of regulatory role, that's really a role that's performed by the Fair Work Ombudsman. So in terms of monitoring the practical operation of those sorts of provisions, it's one which the Fair Work Ombudsman would undertake as part of its statutory
operation. But you give us the broad outline of how the law should apply, shouldn't you?
Well, certainly, if I can refer you to paragraphs 8 through to 10 in terms of the Department submission, and I might ask Mr O'Sullivan to take us through those.
Sure. Well, as a general proposition, foreign employees engaged outside Australia are covered by the laws of the country in which their contracts of employment were formed, including in circumstances where they are working temporarily in Australia for a short period, for example on an international flight into Australia, and where that employment could be described as an ordinary incident of the work they perform overseas under a foreign contract of employment. But it's fair to say that where foreign employees perform work in Australia that is distinct and separate from their foreign employment, then the Fair Work Act and relevant modern awards could apply in relation to that work.
Okay, so does that mean in circumstances, if you have, I mean, is it a case of looking at the various indicators of whether they're transient or temporarily in the country or not? Do you look at what's occurred in previous months? Do you look at how many nights they spend in Australia, the routes that they're on, for instance?
Senator, that'd really be an issue that would sort of be considered in the circumstances of each particular situation, and it's one that, in terms of making a decision, if I can put it that way, as to whether or not the Fair Work Act applied, it wouldn't be one that the department would make. It would be a decision that ultimately is a matter for courts.
Ms. Kovacic, I'm not asking you to make a decision. I want to make that clear. I understand the function, your function, and the function of the department and the function of the Fair Work Ombudsman. But clearly there would be guidelines or indicating factors that you would look at, would there not? I mean, if you have, for instance, a foreign-based crew that might be based overseas, but they're spending 18 or 20 nights a month here in Australia, or it's the base for which they do flights not just from their base, but to other international flights where Australian ports are the fulcrum of their employment.
Senator, I think the sorts of issue that Mr O'Sullivan mentioned, to the extent, I mean, a factor would be the extent to which that stay in Australia, if I can put it that way, would be incidental to their sort of work, their normal duties, if I can put it that way. If, however, for instance, you've got somebody coming in from an international leg and then sort of doing domestic legs, which would be arguably sort of consistently doing domestic legs.
But Mr Kovacic, how would you define a domestic leg? Because if an airline says it's tagged as an international flight, do you look behind the tagging?
Well, Senator, that's where I suppose really you need to look at each situation on its particular circumstances. And again, that's an issue that sort of Fair Work Ombudsman would look at in terms of investigating the particular specifics of an issue, and ultimately a matter that whether it's Fair Work Australia or one of the courts would consider in terms of considering any sort of actions that might be in play.
Just on that particular point, we heard some evidence from some flight attendants at the last hearing, and Cairns and Darwin are sort of hubs for Asia for a particular operator, and basically they'll go to Vietnam or wherever they go. But the allegation was that international segment ended. The flying time for the crew didn't end. They then operated a domestic flight to Sydney and back to Cairns, or they continued on in their duty time, but albeit on a domestic flight. So my particular question is, have you had any complaints from either Darwin or Cairns-based, international crew or Darwin or Cairns-based crew about that type of situation?
Senator, in terms of any complaints, they would have been directed to the Fair Work Ombudsman. I'm aware of 2 investigations that the Fair Work Ombudsman currently has in play. One was the one that Senator Xenophon alluded to previously in respect of foreign crews of foreign aircraft. And there's another one in terms of, I think, Qantas and cadet pilots that are based in New Zealand. And I think both of those investigations are the one that I'm aware of. Whether the Fair Work Ombudsman has received any other complaints, I'd have to take that on notice and ask the Fair Work Ombudsman that.
Okay. So if that were a practice that was established by timetabling and scheduling, that there was a hub which was servicing Asia, but due to, for argument's sake, the curfew periods, there was an opportunity to operate that aircraft domestically, and they used the international crew on that. Would that escape the system as we currently have it?
Senator, look, I really can't give you a definitive answer on. All I can sort of say is that you need to look at the specifics of each particular instance and form a judgment.
What is very clear is if you're operating domestically in Australia, you're covered by the Fair Work Act.
I don't think you can put it that black and white, Senator. I think what you can say is that if the travel in terms of domestic is incidental, arguably, potentially you're not covered, but equally if it's replacing, if I can put it that way, domestic aircraft, it could be covered by the Fair Work Act. Could. Maybe.
It's not clear. You're not able to give us any advice on that.
Well, all I can sort of say, Senator, is that work carried out by overseas-based employees on Australian domestic flights can be seen as a separate and distinct part of their engagement, they may be covered by the Fair Work Act and relevant modern awards. And that's a direct quote from paragraph 8 of the Department's submission.
You have to look at the whole work circumstances, don't you, Mr. Kovacic? You can't to make a decision.
Well, certainly, I think the point I was making is that you'd really need to look at the facts of each particular situation.
In their entirety, you can't just pull out a couple of legs that might look like they're domestic.
How do you make a domestic leg look like a domestic? Sorry, just
anyway. I'm presuming it's that sort of behaviour
we can talk amongst
Gallagher
ourselves
was hinting when he talked about it, the flight is tagged or something.
Most people will understand that airlines operating internationally in and out of Australia, well, there's a cafe flight that goes Adelaide, Melbourne, Hong Kong. It does every day. No one's alleging that the Adelaide, Melbourne, section is domestic flights. It's an international airline, you go through customs, you get on it, and away you go. But what's been said here is there is a hub in Cairns and Darwin, which is an international hub. But for effective utilisation of their aircraft, they're also doing domestic flights, which mean you don't go through customs, you don't go through duty-free, just get on, flash your wand at the machine and away you go. And what we're saying, or what we've been told, or evidence is leading us to, is that international crew are having their hours extended on those domestic legs at substantially lower wages, hundreds of dollars a week lower wages. And in some cases, they're 75% of the crew on that aircraft. And what we were told at hearing is that people were so exhausted they were falling asleep at landing time, which is the time of vigilance and alertness in order to protect the travelling public against any sort of emergency at that time. So these were very serious allegations. They're in the transcript. What we're trying to get to the bottom of is, are these people being paid correctly? Are they being able to operate in a safe manner to safeguard the travelling public? And is the airline that is doing this not obeying the rules?
Well, Senator, all I can reiterate is that really the extent is what I've sort of quoted from our submission, is to the extent that that particular work on those domestic legs is seen as a separate and distinct part of their engagement, it may be covered by the Fair Work Act.
Thank you.
I just ask a final question. The Department, as I read the Department's submission, it seems to be somewhat equivocal, and it's not a criticism, about how the Fair Work Act applies to foreign employers. You've got, Section 5120 of the Constitution empowers the the Parliament to make laws about foreign corporations, but it's not entirely clear to me how you distinguish between the employment activities of a foreign corporation with offices in Australia, or if it's a subsidiary of or if it's got a connection through other associated companies, and a foreign corporation that just has employees that are transient in a sense, in a true sense, if it's an international carrier that they fly in, fly out. How do you deal with that issue from a policy point of view?
Senator, I'm not quite sure I understand the distinction. Could you just give me an example? Or?
Well, I mean...
And which paragraph are you looking at?
I was looking at the broader constitutional power of legislating for foreign corporations, but to pin it down, I mean, how do you manage the vexed issue of territorial application? How will the Fair Work Act apply to for instance, a Thai-based company employing Thai nationals? And as a practical matter, how would you enforce the Fair Work Act when, noting the reference to the High Court's decision in the Maritime Union of Australia ex parte CSL Pacific Shipping, the 2003 High Court decision in relation to foreign corporation? How does that all fit into this?
Well, Senator, perhaps if I can add, clearly the Fair Work Act is the instrument that actually or the piece of legislation that governs employment relationships, and it principally applies to employment relationships formed in Australia. I think the area of grey is clearly the sort of scenario that you're talking about, where you have employees who are engaged by foreign companies overseas. And in normal circumstances, the terms of that engagement are governed by the country in which they're engaged. It's really in those circumstances where they may be doing work in Australia which is seen as separate and distinct from their engagement overseas, and those circumstances where they may be covered by the Fair Work Act. Now, in respect of some areas, the Act sort of deals with its coverage, extraterritorial coverage. That's primarily around areas such as shipping industry in particular, but also in terms of Australians who may be working for Australian corporations overseas, extending that sort of coverage. But I think the point is in terms of overseas-based employees who may be working in Australia, to the extent that work that they're performing in Australia is separate and distinct from their engagement, that may see them covered by the Fair Work Act.
So ultimately we'll need to... There's never really been a test case on this, has there, in terms of the aviation industry, has there?
Not that I'm aware of. Potentially sort of the investigation that the Fair Work Ombudsman is undertaking at the moment.
So that might give us some guide as to how the Act might be
perhaps
interpreted.
It could do.
Do you know how far away we are from a determination on that?
No, I'm sorry, I don't, Senator.
No. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Xenophon. Now, I'm going to lay London to a brick that if Senator Fisher doesn't have a question for your department, I will be gobsmacked. Senator Fisher.
Prepare to be gobsmacked. I've got an ice block in my mouth as well.
It's your old stomping ground, Senator Fisher. I thought you'd be champing at the bit. While she's getting rid of that ice block.
Because I'm sure that you won't be gobsmacked for too much longer.
Senator Edwards.
We know that Qantas is a big employer, and there are many secondary businesses that rely on businesses from Qantas. If Qantas were to suffer a reduction of income due to the bills that are proposed and put forward, has there been any work done on the impact that you think may be on Australia's employment market?
Senator, we've not done any of that modelling. I'm not sure whether the Department of Infrastructure and Transport may have done some of that, but potentially that's probably a question that might be best directed to Qantas.
Okay. When you look at these bills in the context of because I'm new here, okay, what do you look at when you look at these bills, your department specifically?
We've certainly looked at it from the perspective of the issue of Fair Work Act coverage, and I think some of the issues go primarily to the questions that Senator Xenophon was posing to us, to the extent to which employees of overseas airlines may be captured by the Fair Work Act when they're undertaking work in Australia.
So there was some criticism earlier from the ASU about that it didn't go far enough. And if you have given evidence where you commented on this, forgive me if I was out, but is there anything that you would like to add?
Senator, I didn't see the ASU's evidence, and it would be inappropriate for me to comment on it.
Thank you. Senator Fisher might have one.
Don't feel threatened. We'll come to Senator Fisher anyway. It's all right, Senator Edwards. No more? Okay. Senator Fisher, do you have any questions of jurors? We'll rush off to this. No, it's the dinner break. It's the dinner break. It's all right.
Thanks, Chair, for this great opportunity.
We're going to go to the country. We're going to walk through the dinner break. Okay.
Is juror aware of the matters that are allegedly part of the bargaining negotiations between Qantas and the unions who, for example, are allegedly claiming that a hangar needs to be built, and the unions that are allegedly claiming job security clauses need to be included in agreements? Is juror aware of any detail around those claims?
In broad terms, we're aware of them, Senator.
Okay, and how are you aware of them? Just from the media, or?
Well, a combination of one, clearly media would be one avenue we'd become aware of it, but we've also had conversations with the parties involved in the current in the bargaining rounds at Qantas as well.
Okay, so what do you understand to be the wish or the wish of the union in respect of the building of the hangar?
Senator, I'm not aware of the detail. I'm aware that in general terms that is arguably an issue in the negotiations, but I'm not aware of the precise specifics.
Okay, and which union is that?
My understanding is that it's the ALAEA.
Yeah, the engineers basically.
Yep.
Yeah. And what about the claims around job security and outsourcing? What do you know about the detail of those?
Senator, again, it's all in general terms. In terms of the claims, I wouldn't really be able to go beyond that.
Okay. And which unions are making those claims?
My understanding is that the three unions that have been have all had claims that could be characterised, or elements of claims that could be characterised as job security issues.
Okay. Do you have a view as to whether or not the siting of a hangar and or the building of a hangar is a matter over which a strike action could be legally taken under the Fair Work Act? In principle?
Senator, what I can say is that issues of job security are issues which can be bargained over and which there is capacity for protected industrial action to occur in circumstances where all the requirements of the Fair Work Act
so are you in saying that, Mr Kovacic, characterising the siting of a hangar as a job security issue?
No, I'm not saying that, Senator. What I'm saying, what I did say is that issues going to job security are issues which can be bargained on and which can be included in enterprise agreements negotiated under the Fair Work Act, and subject to all of the sort of requirements being met,
yes, of course.
Issues which protected industrial action could be taken under.
So what about the building of a hangar in a particular location?
Senator, I will reiterate again that issues of job security are matters which can be bargained for under the Fair Work Act.
So you're saying that you don't know whether the siting of the hangar...
You have asked us in your legal training way of doing it, that you have asked the same question in a number of ways, and Mr Kovacic has answered.
So I know you don't like the answer. Another question, Chair. Are you saying that you don't know whether the siting of a hangar is a job security issue or not?
Senator Fisher, Mr Kovacic has made it very clear. I know you're not getting the answer that you may want. Do you have further questions that haven't anything to do with the site of the hangar?
I think Mr O'Sullivan's got an answer.
Senator, what I'd reiterate again is issues of job security are capable of being bargained on and included in an enterprise agreement negotiated under the Fair Work Act. And to the extent that the requirements of the Fair Work Act are met, certainly protected industrial action can be taken in support of those claims around job security.
So I guess you'd then say that following that on, in principle, the citing of a hangar could be the subject of an enforceable clause in an agreement under the Fair Work Act?
Senator, I really can't add anything to the answers I've provided.
Senator Fisher, I'm being patient, but I've got some more ice blocks here if you want.
Thank you,
helps.
Chair. So, Mr Kovacic, what about under the predecessor to the Fair Work Act? What about the permissibility of legal strike action over the citing of a hangar?
Well, a long-standing principle of federal workplace relations regulation is that agreements and bargains can deal with matters pertaining to the employment relationship. And issues going to job security have long been recognised as being matters pertaining to the employment relationship. I suppose the exception to that period was the period between 2006 through till 2009, which is the work choices period, where issues going to there were certain issues specified as prohibited content, and one of those was relating to issues going to the use of contractors and so on and so forth. So I think for the bulk of the history of federal workplace relations regulation issues with job security being able to be bargained over, with the exception of that sort of period under the work choice.
So it couldn't be bargained over, it couldn't be legally struck over, and it couldn't legally be the subject of an enforceable clause in an agreement under the work choices, call it that way, Workplace Relations Act, is that right?
For that period, that's sort of,
Okay, and do you have anything to add to your answer in respect of the citing of a hangar?
No, I don't, Senator.
What a surprise. Thanks, Mr Kovacic. Thanks, Chair.
You know, I should have taken a monetary bet.
Ice block?
All right, I was weak. I was pathetically weak. I didn't put any money on that. All right, are there any further questions?
One last one.
Yes, Senator Edwards.
One last one. Prior to the 29th of October and since May 2011, did the Minister or anyone in the Minister's office request information or prepare a note or briefing for the Minister on the use of Section 424 of the Fair Work Act or Section 431 of the Fair Work Act?
Senator, the Department provides advice to the Minister on a range of workplace relations issues on an ongoing basis, and certainly in the context of the Qantas negotiations, we provided a range of advice going to developments as well as provisions of the Fair Work Act.
Okay, thanks.
If there are no further questions, Mr Kovacic and your officers of the Department of Education, Employment and Workplace Relations, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I now call our good friends from CASA, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, the Department of Infrastructure and Transport. This is a double beamer, is it? This is yes. Yeah. For time constraints, it's a heck of a lot easier doing it like this too. Yeah. Yeah. Mr. McCormick. Well, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Mr. Murdoch and Mr. McCormick. Thank you for coming along now, and to the officers of the Civil Aviation Safety Authority and the Department of Infrastructure and Transport. And I would remind all senators that the Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth or
of a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution prohibits only questions asking for opinions on matters of policy and does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. Officers of the department are also reminded that any claim that it would be contrary to the public interest to answer a question must be made by a minister and should be accompanied by a statement setting out the basis for the claim. For the Hansard record, could you please give your names and the capacity in which you appear today?
Thank you, Chair. Mike Murdoch, Secretary, Department of Infrastructure and Transport.
Thank you. We'll go along.
Stephen Borthwick, General Manager, Aviation Industry Policy, Infrastructure and Transport.
Jim Wolf, Acting Executive Director, Aviation Impulse Division in the Department of Infrastructure and Transport.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is John McCormick, the Director of Aviation Safety, Civil Aviation Safety Authority.
Adam Anastasia, Chief Legal Officer of the Civil Aviation Safety Authority.
Chair, good evening. Greg Hood, Executive Manager Operations for the Civil Aviation Safety Authority.
And Grant Howard, Safety Systems Inspector on CASA Operations.
I have to confess there's a few officers at the table we haven't met before, so welcome to the RAC Committee. We'll get to know each other too well in the next few months, I'm sure. Okay, before we go to questions, Mr Murdoch, would you or Mr McCormick wish to make a brief opening statement?
Perhaps if I may, Senator, just make a brief statement just to put our departmental submission in context, if you don't mind.
Please.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. Chair, the department considers that Australian airlines need to continue to have flexibility to adapt their business strategies to changing market circumstances in order to remain strong, viable business into the future. This is particularly the case as the international aviation market is competitive and most of the growth of international aviation will take place in key overseas markets such as Asia. Australia is very fortunate to be part of the Asia-Pacific region. This is where the growth of aviation will take place over the next century. It's reported that the Asia-Pacific region in 2009 overtook North America as the largest aviation market in the world. The International Air Transport Association predicts that the region will produce some 360 million more travellers by 2014, with 200 million additional travellers from China alone over the next decades. Boeing predicts that aviation travel in Asia-Pacific will grow at around 6.7% per annum over the next 20 years. The challenge for Australia's aviation industry is how to best take advantage of these growth opportunities, given the inherent constraints of the international aviation regulatory system and our geographic location. The bilateral system under which international aviation operates prevents Australian airlines from conducting standalone intra-Asian operations, and there are limits on what's called fifth freedom rights, where flights within Asia are conducted as a part of a flight that starts or ends in Australia. Despite the Australian government's success in negotiating improved access for Australian carriers to markets in Asia, this situation will continue. It is in this context that investing in overseas airlines, including those based in Asia, is a means by which Australian companies and Australian airlines can seek to gain access to key markets to complement Australian-based operations. In the Department's view, as set out in our submission, the two bills being considered by the Committee raise significant issues for the operations of all Australian airlines and their ability to compete internationally. The regulatory framework proposed by the Aircraft Crew Bill would remove the flexibility which underpins many of the services operated by Australian airlines, such as investments in low-cost carriers which service our domestic and international tourism markets, the partnerships with regional airlines which provide services to rural and regional Australia, and the commercial arrangements such as code sharing with key airline alliance partners. The Department considers the Still Call Australia Home Bill would effectively prevent Qantas from investing in overseas companies based in key growth markets, with its international business effectively limited to the relatively small pool of passengers which travel to and from Australia. We note this would be a unique situation which we are not aware of applies to any of Australia's other key industries. We also note both bills seek to extend their application to Australian international airlines, their subsidiaries and associated entities. This potentially covers a wide range of airlines and companies, not all of whom are Australian. The Department's submission makes clear our view that we do not believe the proposed bills will assist Australian airlines to grow into the future. Indeed, we believe it would have the net effect of reducing employment opportunities within the Australian aviation industry by reducing international growth opportunities and impact on consumers' ability to access best available options on Australian carriers. Thank you, Chair. We'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr Murdoch, and we'll ask that you table your Would you mind tabling your opening statement? Mr. McCormick, did you wish to make an opening statement?
Thanks, Chair. No, we won't. Our submissions before the committee, and for me to summarise that might be just a bit of a waste of time. I think your valuable time.
Thank you very much. Questions, Senator Xenophon.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. McCormick, if I could... the primary motivation for the flight crew bill related to a number of complaints I've had about the conditions that foreign-based flight crew flying within Australia seem to have quite different conditions applying to them, particularly in relation to issues of fatigue management, leaving aside issues of wages and condition. On 18th of March this year at the previous inquiry into pilot training and airline safety, you made a statement that in terms of and I'll read it to you, so I think it's in context about fatigue risk management. You said, certainly as soon as we get the ICAO standards, we'll start work on those. This year, if the ICAO data next month or thereabouts is correct for the paperwork to come to us or for it to be available, we will have completed by November fatigue risk management guidelines for flight crew, but I would anticipate the cabin crew being finished sometime next year. Where are we at to that in relation to cabin crew?
I'll ask Mr Hood, or in fact Mr Howard, to answer that if I could,
Sure.
Senator. But yes, we have received the guidelines, and yes, we have started to form the working groups. We're taking it slightly longer with the flight crew than what we thought. That'll be early 2012 rather than the end of November 2011. And we're still on track for the middle of the year 2012 for the cabin crew. However, maybe...
Senator, thanks. Yeah. I suppose our resources and the regulator that are experienced and skilled in the fatigue area are currently devoted to the working group, working with the unions and operators in relation to the flight crew rules. And as soon as we've got those in a shape to put out to public consultation, we'll be starting to commence the work on the flight attendant rules.
Because time is short, I just want to focus on this. One of the complaints put to me, and Mr Buchanan was quite emphatic in his evidence, and I take it, I note what he said, that there is no difference, that the conditions are the same. But what I've been told by foreign-based flight crew for Jetstar, for instance, I don't pick on them, is that there are circumstances where they can have duty extensions, where they're supposed to, it seems on the face of it to be the same hours that would apply in terms of fatigue issues as Australian crew, but the duty extensions for the foreign-based crew are much greater, and they're flying in and out of the country, based here on a majority of nights in many cases, flying on so-called international tag flights, but most would regard as effectively a domestic flight. How do you look behind that in terms of those duty extensions, and what do you do with a complaint that I've had personally to me, where they say that if they make a complaint about fatigue issues, they believe that their jobs would be in jeopardy in terms of their overseas-based employer? How do we grasp with that from a safety point of view?
Yes, Senator, firstly there's a couple of issues I'll ask Mr Howard in a moment. We actually have done a study in relation to the flight crew limitations for cabin crew between Australia and Southeast Asia. So I might ask Mr Howard first to talk about the results of that, and then I'll come back to the other.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Senator. Following the ABC late line
Sorry,
program...
Mr Howard, you might just want to only for the purposes of Hansel, I know you have done it, just your position. To do it efficiently. Thanks.
Following the ABC late line program...
Sorry, just Mr Grant Howard, just take some...
Oh, sorry, Grant Howard. Okay.
And what you do? I know you've done it all, but for the purposes of Hansel.
Okay.
Safety Systems.
Safety Systems Inspector, CASA Operations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Following the ABC late line program on 27 of July, CASA approached Jetstar to investigate those claims made in the program, particularly the ones where the Bangkok-based crew were allegedly reprimanded for their actions in reporting fatigue off XJQ35 the previous April. Jetstar wasn't aware that that action had been undertaken by their contractors, the management of their cabin crew, and the CEO made some urgent and approaches to the TET management to have that rectified. CASA was satisfied with the outcomes of that, and we've continued to conduct investigations into Jetstar's fatigue risk management systems, system development, and at this stage we're reasonably satisfied that management do promote a just culture and open, free reporting culture, and would be interested to know of details of any instances where this is not actually operating.
And Senator, if I may, following the previous hearing where Mr Joyce was appearing in front of this committee, we've taken the Hansard extract of that, particularly the testimony of the two cabin attendants, and we're looking at each of those issues that they raised in front of the committee in the context of a formal investigation to investigate some of the claims that they made.
But just to make it clear, so I don't misunderstand this, there are no CASA rules that apply to cabin crew fatigue at this stage. Is that right?
As far as fatigue risk management systems go, no, there's no rules at the moment. We don't have an effective head of power at the moment. But there is a head of power there, but it's not really effective in the terms of category risk.
5.55, is that right?
On legal advice, I'd say yes. I think so.
Well, it's always good to write legal advice. But that's specific to flight crew. So is there a head of power for Mr Anastasio, I don't know if we're all answers, but would 5.55 be the head of power that would apply to cabin crew, or is there not a head of power that CASA can rely on?
Well, 5.55, as you have already pointed out, refers to pilots effectively. So, but obviously that regulation is made pursuant to the Civil Aviation Act, so the head of power for that regulation is in the Act, and the Act itself would enable the regulation to be made that could make provision for there to be fatigue or duty limits for cabin crew.
Sure, but I mean, so you're saying CASA, perhaps to you, Mr McCormick, has CASA contemplated writing a simple regulation, 5.5A, that will provide a head of power for fatigue management for cabin crew?
Senator, we're proceeding on the basis that we do have a head of power to do a fatigue risk management system for cabin crew.
Now, when I bore my friends with aviation issues, and I tell them that there is no regulation for cabin crew fatigue, they're quite surprised by that. Is there any substantive reason why that cabin crew fatigue has been left out, given the important role that cabin crew fundamentally are there for the safety of passengers in the event of an emergency?
That calls for a bit of speculation on my part, I think, Senator, but I think the issue would go to the fact that the cabin crew worldwide have never been licensed personnel as such, so they haven't been subject, for instance, to compulsory medical examinations, they haven't been subject to other licence responsibilities. Sure, they have recurrent training in there and they have their standards to maintain, etc. And I think it's most probably grown out of that they were not seen necessarily as being in the same category as pilots, but that's my speculation.
Sure. There's nothing to stop CASA from enacting a temporary cabin crew fatigue management scheme, is there?
At this stage, if we were to do that, we would seriously divert resources from completing the fatigue risk management scheme for the pilots.
Okay. Can I just go to the issue of, and you heard the department earlier, in terms of how do you categorise the Fair Work Ombudsman's investigating some matters relating to cabin crew, and we don't know what the outcome of that will be, or when it will be handed down. But how do you deal with issues of flight crew? Where is your jurisdiction? If a flight crew is based in Bangkok, for instance, but they do most of their work here, if they're working on flights that could reasonably be categorised as domestic flights, even though they're tagged as international flights, to what extent do you have jurisdiction for dealing with fatigue and safety issues involving cabin crew for foreign carriers, for instance?
Well, foreign carriers themselves, of course, are regulated in their home countries, and under the ICAO agreements with the Chicago Convention, we accept that there is oversight from the overseas airline, the home country of the flag carrier, or the airline where it's domiciled. We, of course, issue a foreign aircraft air operator certificate to anybody who is an international operator flying into Australia outside of New Zealand, and in that case, of course, we have ability to oversight what they're doing with their crew, the numbers they have, whether their training is up to date. The rostering issues about fatigue and how long they've worked, etc., generally lives with the airline.
If you are alerted to difficulties with a foreign-based carrier, do you have any jurisdiction under the Chicago Convention or any other source of jurisdiction to go to that foreign-based carrier and say, we've got concerns about the fatigue management systems for your cabin crew.
Under our foreign aircraft air operator certificate regime, we are able to put conditions on that certificate, as we can with an Australian air operator certificate. If for any particular reason we had concerns about an operator, we would put conditions on their air operator certificate, as I think we've discussed before in front of the committee of various airlines to the north of us. As far as any other further head of power, as far as extraterritorial effect of our foreign aircraft air operator certificate, I don't think we have that power, but I'll ask Mr. Anastasi whether he wishes to expand on that from a legal point of view.
Well, CASA can only issue a AOC to a foreign aircraft operator if it is satisfied it can conduct those operations safely. So whilst the regulations don't apply flight duty time limitations to foreign pilots, nonetheless, if it comes to CASA's attention that there are issues concerning fatigue of those pilots, then CASA's broad ability to ensure that that operator is safe will allow it to look into those issues and even look at whether the provisions under which those crew operate are satisfactory. So as part of our assessment, we will look at their operations manual, and that manual would normally set out those type of matters, and CASA is entitled to review those matters, and if not satisfied, to refuse to issue an AOC or to take some other action.
My final question is, I do have a couple of questions on maintenance issues, if I may.
Well, you've got plenty of time, Senator Xenophon. Senator Gallagher has questions, but you take
music to my ears when you say plenty of time.
I made that mistake in estimates, and I promise I won't do it again. At this stage, you have enough time for those questions you wish to ask.
Thank you. In relation, and thank you, Mr. Anastasi, for that answer. In terms of flight crew, in terms of cabin fatigue, I've spoken to enough people to say they're scared to raise it. That if they raise it with management that they're fatigued, it's a black mark against them. To what extent can we entrench that just culture? I mean, this is a dilemma where they say if we raise it, suddenly we won't get a roster, our contracts won't be renewed. There's a genuine fear from the information I receive from people that I've spoken to in terms of their employment conditions if they dare raise their head about fatigue issues. How do you? I mean, it's not a trick question. How do you deal with that?
Yes, thanks, Senator. It is a difficult one to look behind the curtain, so to speak, into an organisation, because a lot of people who perhaps are prepared to say things out loud aren't necessarily prepared to put them on paper or talk to us or give us an example. Obviously, anybody who reports specific instances to us, we investigate fully. We run them down to ground. As far as the interactions between the management within an organisation and its employees, unless it's strictly safety related, and I think what you're talking about is safety related, then we have difficulty having any role to play.
But if I can give you an instance, if there is, for instance, a subsidiary that provides crew for an airline that flies in and out of Australia that has it's a subsidiary, not a subsidiary, but where an Australian carrier has a substantial share in that employment company, and if the information is that the manager consistently says to people, if you start complaining about these things, you won't have a job, we'll lose our contract, you need to stay silent on it. To what extent can you, as a regulator, say to associated entities, so that's not acceptable, safety has to be the paramount consideration? And I'm putting it in broad terms, I don't want to be more specific than that.
Well, if we get a specific example like we talked about with the Bangkok issue with Jetstar, then of course we do take action, and we do, even if it is an associated company, if I could use that as a sort of a blanket term, we do take action and we require things to be corrected. If it's strictly a work issue between an employer and an employee, and it just so happens in the instance it happens to be an employer and employee in the aviation industry, then there's other legislation which deals with that, and our Civil Aviation Act is generally silent. When it comes to affecting flight safety, Yes, we do have a role to play, and we have a role to play, though, from the flight safety aspect, not from the industrial relations aspect. And I tried to bring that out into the letter which I'd sent to operators earlier in October about that, saying we have no role to play in industrial relations.
And I appreciate that. This is about the safety aspect.
So when someone brings something to us, or we become aware of it through either industry intelligence or through our own surveillance activities, then we do take action, as Mr. Howard has pointed out.
My final line of questioning relates to the issue of aircraft maintenance. We heard from Mr. Pavinas from the licensed aircraft engineers, and I put some questions of notice of Qantas in terms of the RB211 engines and issues of maintenance. And I note that Mr. Sandilands, on plain talking just today, I think was, publicly didn't quite draft questions for the committee, but was raised matters that he thought could be properly considered by the committee. The issue that the aircraft engineers raised about the RB211 engines, their concerns are in terms of the modifications, whether all the speed at which the modifications have been done, the relevant oversight, not just in relation to RB211 engines, but where there's overseas maintenance of Australian aircraft. What role does CASA have? Do you have any? Is there any overview you can give us about the RB211 engines? I think it's been put to me that there's been a high rate of failures, of engine problems in recent years, and which some parties say is due to the outsourcing. Now, I don't have evidence for that, but that's one of the assertions that's been made.
If I could go backwards through those, if I could, sure. And I will give you a few figures. The maintenance that has to be carried out on the engines is done to a certain standard and to a schedule. And the schedule of maintenance, generally on repair intervals, component overhaul times, replacement times, is something that's produced by the manufacturer. In the case of the RB211 524 engine series that we're talking about, that's Rolls-Royce PLC in the UK. When Rolls-Royce produced that document and say, this is how you overhaul this engine, this is what you do at this number of hours, etc., 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 that document goes to the world. There is no specific document in Australia outside of that as far as the base maintenance of the type of overhaul we're talking about. The fact that it is done overseas versus done in Australia, if it's done to the Rolls-Royce requirements, there is no difference. There is no difference whatsoever. And though there are instances here, of course, where we've seen maintenance, the questions have been raised about maintenance that's been done overseas, that's been done to perhaps not the same standards required in Australia. We also have quite a number of instances in Australia where the maintenance done in Australia is very poor and certainly substandard, and there are investigations ongoing at the moment, not to do with Qantas, but about the substandard maintenance. So I think it's one of those issues where people in glass houses must be very careful they start to throw stones.
I understand.
So back to the in-flight shutdown rate, or the IFSD, for RB211 for the period of March 2010 to November 2011, our analysis, and I will stress it as our analysis, says that the in-flight shutdown rate was between 0.012 and 0.018 for each 1,000 engine hours. With the world fleet, that would predominantly be Cathay Pacific Airways and British Airways added into that, South African Airways if they're still flying the 400 and of course the 767s that are fitted with that engine. The world fleet in-flight shutdown rate for the same period was between 0.004 and 0.009 for 1,000 engine hours. Clearly the Qantas in-flight shutdown rate is higher, but it's not lower than the world fleet average. Despite the slight variation in quotas figures, propulsion system monitoring under what would be extended diversion time operations. This is under twin engine aeroplanes as opposed to a 4-engine aeroplane that we're talking about here. There is no requirement for Qantas to work to those rules. There's no requirement for anybody who has a 4-engine aircraft to work to the rules for 2-engine aircraft, because the 2-engine rules naturally are much more stretched. You lose one engine, you lost 50% of the thrust. And it's an emergency situation of quite serious purport. So the 12-month rolling average, we would be concerned if it exceeded 0.02 per 1,000 hours for an EDTO operation. So Qantas is at 0.012 to 0.018. If it was a twin-engine aeroplane, provided it was below 0.02, which it is, then we would say that it is high and there must be remedial action, which Qantas is taking, but it is still within the acceptable boundaries. I do have a bit more technical information on the number of engines.
I'd be grateful if you could perhaps table that up in terms of time.
I can table the figures to you, or I'll take it on notice if I could send it.
If you could. But just to wrap up on this, in terms of overseas, where maintenance has been done overseas, presumably does CASA have a role in conjunction with the airlines to ensure, for instance, that you're satisfied with the maintenance standards overseas, or you just see the final?
No, the first one, Senator, we actually go overseas, inspect the organisation on a regular basis and approve the maintenance facility.
Yeah.
Now, if there happens to be maintenance being carried out at the time on an Australian aircraft, then we observe that maintenance, commensurate with the work that my inspectors have to do. If they have somewhere else to go, they may not be able to do that. If there is not necessarily an Australian registered aircraft there, we conduct the audit, and if the facility is still up to requirements, and it gets approval.
I notice, if I would just get some, if you are able to give details of, the regularity of it, and this, I think that would assure many
regularity of the audits,
and the locations. That would be useful. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Senator. Sorry, Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. And look, just on the theme of fatigue management of Senator Xenophon, you deal with licence. This is a CASA question. Sorry, I'll come back. You deal with all people that are licensed, so the pilots, everything like that. I'm just interested in whether you've done any benchmarking of Australian people, which you have in your jurisdiction, and other airlines. And in terms of fatigue management, how do we rate in comparison to other countries under the Chicago Convention, i.e. are we far more conservative than other countries?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I don't think we've done an in-depth study. That would be fair to say. We do monitor different amounts of fatigue of operators that we have access to their information. My own personal experience, having flown for an overseas operator and for Qantas, overseas, it's fair to say that it is no less gruelling than it is in Australia, and in many instances is far more gruelling. However, that would be my personal view and not the view of CASA.
Yeah, and I'm interested, anecdotal or otherwise, so we would be far more conservative in a fatigue management of the people that are licensed to provide services to airlines than perhaps other countries. I
think it's fair to say, Senator, that having a bit of an insight into the industry from my previous experience, there are operators that require very, very tough work conditions from their crew, much harder than we have in Australia, and I'm certain there are some who are actually easier than Australia. It's not a very easy one to actually say what a benchmark is, other than the ICAO guidance.
Would the easier ones, would they be the ones that are subsidised by sovereign countries and things like that, in your experience?
Again, that would call for some speculation on my part, Senator, but I would imagine that the financial situation of the airline and the base where it operates may influence those factors, yes. Okay, well, we'll just move on then on that same theme, it's on the same theme, and no, Senator Xenophon's. And you've had some, Mr Murdoch, you've had some notice of this, because I asked the previous department of this. I was just talking about Qantas being a big employer, and there are a lot of other companies which rely on Qantas and its viability that rely on it. If in the context of these bills, and I note your very solid position and interpretation on the bills that have been introduced, if Qantas were to suffer by virtue of the bills that are in front of us a reduction in income, what would be the impact on the Australian employment market, would you think?
Well, Senator, we haven't done any detailed analysis. It's very difficult to determine an exact figure, but certainly the way in which the bills would apply to airline commercial arrangements such as code share would have a significant impact, because it effectively would limit Australian carriers to a very small number of routes on which they provide direct services. And in the instance of an airline like Qantas, or I think we heard from Virgin Australia a little bit earlier, code sharing is quite a critical issue for them in terms of being able to offer networks to be competitive with foreign carriers who can offer global networks. So in terms of overall profitability, it is vitally important, because it provides network linkages which sustain employment in the company. Because as you'll appreciate, you can't. One of the real benefits of larger networks is you can offer customers connection points and the like. If you can't do that, you're effectively precluding yourself from a large proportion of the business.
So if I was to conclude then, if you saw these bills being successful, you would see an increase in unemployment in this industry?
We would certainly see limits on the capacity of Australian carriers to grow, and certainly I think the airlines have made clear their view that it would lead to a reduction in their capacity to participate in international operations, which would result in less employment, yes.
Of Australian jobs.
Of Australian jobs.
Okay, fairly important point. Just one last one, Alex.
Yeah, sure.
I've heard that before. Yeah,
you've been very
ASU gave some evidence earlier, and this is a question of you, Mr. McCormick. If you wouldn't mind, and there were some the general observations, and I suspect anecdotal in part, but it goes to the point of load control, and there was an inference, I guess, in the evidence which was given and which I have in front of me, and you would see in their evidence that perhaps that the control of, load control being outsourced to places other than Australia compromised effective delivery of that service. You have control over load control as such. What would be your comment?
Thank you, Senator. We do have control over load systems. That's under our Civil Aviation Order 20.16.1. This system will be included, referred to in the flight manual. So the aircraft flight manual has the loading system in it. The loading system is generally quite a lot of data. Now, it may not necessarily be in the flight manual, it may be in the operations manual, and our procedures and our circulars on that cater for that case. The actual construction of what's called the load sheet, which is the eventual document that the captain of the aircraft must get by law to show how the aircraft is loaded, where the weights are put, and where the balance, centre of gravity, centre of CG of the airplane is, which is essential for performance of the airplane. That is a computer process generally. You can do it by hand, by entering charts and graphs or tables, and most pilots are trained to do that. I'm talking now large high-capacity regular public transport, the Qantas type operations. Yep. That's done by a computer system. The errors come when either the actual loading of the aircraft is done incorrectly by the loaders on the ramp, and that they put the wrong pallet in the wrong place, or they don't put the right pallet on at all, or they put on too many, or it's in a data loading issue where the data put into the computer by the load control people is incorrect. Now, there are many cross-references that should be done to check that. The crew themselves have to check that the numbers are correct in most organisations. So I assume now that Qantas have the same procedures, not having looked at it, but I know they will have, to what their specific procedure is, because it's a requirement to have that cross-check of the loading system. Errors generally are human. They're generally as garbage in, garbage out. The wrong numbers put in, you get the wrong answer out. There was a question, I think, during that testimony about the incident in Melbourne where the A340 from Emirates hit the lights at the far end of the runway and hit the ILS installation on takeoff and narrowly averted disaster. That was not a fault of loading of the aircraft, nor was that a fault of the load control. That was a fault of the crew on board the aeroplane who in their laptop computer, which they had to work out the takeoff data. This is the speed at which the aeroplane is going to get airborne, how much thrust to use. You always optimise the thrust to the weight of the aeroplane so that it uses nearly all the runway. Less thrust you use, less you wear out the engines, less the maintenance burden and the overhaul cost. That is traditional and is well established in the airlines operations worldwide. The error came in the Emirates case in that the pilots put in the wrong number themselves into the takeoff data. They put in what they thought was the takeoff weight, but they put in what was the empty weight of the aeroplane. So they were 100 tonnes in error. That error was made on the flight deck and had absolutely nothing to do with the load control or the loading of the aircraft or where that load data was done. If the load information is done somewhere, it's as simple as over an internet connection. It doesn't necessarily need to be anywhere from a purely technical point of view. I'm not talking about jobs, I'm not talking about anything like that. You can exercise complete control from anywhere in the world these days over that sort of operation. To the smaller end of town, particularly some of the business jets, this sort of data is worked out remotely anyway. It's provided by a third-party operator. The principles behind weight and balance and loading of the aircraft are the same, whether it's a small aircraft or a very large aircraft. So control or an audit trail to the data or how the data is worked out, that's perhaps, I would not put quite as much emphasis on the physical location of the computing operation as much as the previous lady did in her testimony.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's an excellent description of this, and it clears up a lot. So whether it's based in Adelaide or Manila, is really irrelevant.
It is irrelevant, provided the oversight is there from whoever has outsourced it to wherever it is in the world. It's irrelevant where it is.
Thank you very much, Mr. McCormick, and thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Follow up on that question.
Yes, Senator Fawcett.
I understand that the ATSB investigated a low control incident with Qantas and had some 28 incidents recorded. Were those incidents when the low control was being conducted in Australia or when it was in the overseas base?
I'm not aware of all 28, but as an example, there was a low control incident in Shanghai and February this year, and there was an incident in Sydney as well. I'll ask Mr. Hood, as the EM of operations, to perhaps comment in a second, but the one in Sydney, to my knowledge, in actual fact, was the fact a loader, and it was a forklift, loaded the wrong pallet on board the aircraft. Now, of course, if that's done and there's not sufficient checks on the ground handling people of what they're doing, then you get the garbage in, garbage out problem where the wrong information goes into the system. The computing system itself doesn't know really how to make a mistake outside of a normal sort of computer program. So,
could you perhaps just take on notice then a request to see whether there has been any change in the incidents of reporting of loading incidents since Qantas chose to offshore its low control processing centre?
Not all its load control is offshore. There is some in Sydney and Melbourne. So you're talking specifically about the overseas.
Well, since they've made that move, whether there's been an increase in the rate, is what I'm asking. Obviously there's a net system, some onshore, some off. I'd like to know if there's a change in the rate, of 10 years ago versus now.
Okay, yes, certainly we'll have a look at that.
Thanks, Senator Fawcett. Senator Gallagher.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Murdoch, you gave some explanation about the international implications of the change in the Act with code share and the like. Do you have a view? No, that's the wrong question. I think the provocation, if you like, for contemplating these changes was that an Australian operated company would set up an employment company, own it half 50%, employ people on Thai wages, and then use them in Australian domestic operations. It's not really a situation where, you do a code share with Singapore and you're in and out. That's just fair and above practice that goes on worldwide. This is about someone actually setting out to employ people on Thai wages through a 50% owned company by the operator and bring them into Australian wages, into the Australian arena, paying them substantially lower wages.
Certainly, I understand the point you're making, Senator. The issue is the way in which these bills are being prepared effectively captures all commercial operations, including subsidiaries, associates, and goes to the nature of the commercial arrangements I was talking about, which captures a whole range of commercial arrangements in the industry. So that the breadth of this bill is much more than capturing the use of foreign contracted labourers in the domestic market. That is the point I was trying to make here.
That's fine, and I think
and in relation to the matter you raise, we obviously operate under the system. We regulate international operations. The Australian domestic market is deregulated, apart from the labour arrangements which are regulated by the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, who you spoke to a moment ago. In relation to international operations, we certainly do regulate the operations of the carriers having to operate under bilateral rights and the like. So I think the point I was making is that the bill goes much beyond the circumstances which triggered some of the concerns that yourself and Senator Xenophon have raised about the use of foreign labour in the domestic situation.
All right, thanks for that. I think we've clarified that for the Secretariat, and they would probably appreciate that. They wanted that fleshed out a bit. Look, Mr. McCormick, my questions, a number of questions go to your organisation, and look, I really appreciate and note the main object of the Act is to establish a regulatory framework for maintaining, enhancing and promoting the safety of civil aviation, with particular emphasis on the prevention of aviation accidents and incidents. That's your Act, I suppose. And I've been the recipient of many years of safe flying in Australia, along with millions of Australians who have taken millions of trips, if you like. And when I go through your submission and I come to clause 38, you clearly say there that you don't have a view on whether Qantas maintenance should be done in Australia or anywhere else. And you then go on to clause 39, where you say the AOC holders may lawfully outsource many aspects of their operational and maintenance-related functions. However, they may not outsource their responsibility and accountability for the safety of their operations. My question in the first part is, an AOC holder is one person?
No, the AOC is actually issued to a company, and there is a responsible person for the AOC.
Responsible person. So you then have control and authority, I suppose, under the Act over the AOC holder and the one person who, let's be brutal about it. I mean, Barings Banks is no longer with us. They basically employed a person of great integrity and whatever, and he turned out and blew the bank up. What if your AOC holder does engage in some practices that are less than what we would expect here in Australia in order to save some money? How do you deal with that? How do you cope with it? How do you check it out?
Thanks for that question, Senator. Yes, we certainly do, and I think unfortunately we had an example of Tiger Airways earlier this year where we were facing just these issues. Sometime earlier as well this year, March from memory, I wrote to all AOC holders in Australia, and particularly to the CEOs, and quoted Section 28BE of our Act, which puts the onus of responsibility for the control of safety and control of the issues with the CEO and primarily with the board, similar to the ACCC's requirements of a listed company. If we see that we are having difficulty with control here, and I would also, of course, refer you to that paragraph of 39. They may not outsource their responsibility and accountability for safety of their operations. What we're really saying there is that where the maintenance is carried out, as discussed previously here a few minutes ago, is not necessarily as important as who controls the maintenance, what maintenance is being done, when it's being done, what system of maintenance is being done to. Those functions must remain in Australia. They must remain under the direct control of the AOC holder or the CEO. In the end, the CEO is the person who has control of the money. Therefore, he says what, or she says what's being spent on safety, what's being spent on maintenance, replacement, etc. So that is where the buck stops. And we pointed out to all the CEOs, as I say, earlier this year. When we do see that they have issues, we have a number of instruments available to us. We can put through what's called a show cause notice. We can put out safety alerts. We can request for corrective actions. If none of that works, we can go through the show cause process, which is to show cause why we should not vary, suspend or cancel the air operator certificate. If we get no further with that process, and that can be quite a lengthy process due to the legal remedies available, and if there are to be, or unfortunately if there are incidents which cause us to think that there is no safety resilience left in the organisation, then we can go to the serious and imminent risk provisions, which allow us to ground an airline, or ground anyone for that matter, or tell them to cease maintenance and other issues under the COA. But in the AOC, we can of course take that action, which then goes into the federal court system, which is what we did with Tiger. We're not backward in coming forward on this, but by the same token, we're not out there to put businesses out of business. It really comes down to, I think, that responsibility and then the control. If Qantas are correct in their statement that...
I'm listening carefully to you, but what I'm getting, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, what I'm getting is that you're holding people accountable who are in the business of making a quid. And I'm flying on the airline and I've got to trust that they're the right people. That's the nut of it?
And we're here to make sure that trust is given to you.
So could you give us an example of an issue that provokes your attention?
Well, again, I think issues with Tiger would be the best examples, where we see issues of flying errors, where we see issues of either disregard for the rules, actual damage to aircraft, incidents reports. We work very closely, obviously, with the ATSB, the Safety Bureau. We see their reports. We have our own intelligence. So anything we see which is not best behaviour is of course a cause for concern. In our requirements, though, there is the law. If they are not breaking the law, then it becomes a judgment call, as it does in any other field. Aviation is no different.
what I'm curious, or not curious, but I'd like to get some understanding of what are the qualifications of the actual person who holds the certificate? And how can that person exercise a safety portfolio or protocol, if you like, when he has a commercial boss? How does that tension work?
Well, that's the reason why I wrote to all the AOC holders earlier this year to say that under Section 28B of the Act, where it specifically mentions the CEO as being responsible, we've seen not necessarily obfuscation, but we've seen certainly a bit of cloudiness around who is responsible, where does the buck stop. And that letter which we sent, and I think I'm not sure whether we tabled it here or not, Chair, at a previous estimates. We can check Hansard to see whether we tabled that. One of the things it pointed out there was that it may do, was on the basis that we interpreted the Act to say the CEO is responsible. If anybody who was received that letter, I think the final paragraph said, we suggest you seek your own legal advice on whether our interpretation is correct. And to my knowledge, most of the people I've spoken, well, not to my knowledge, but most of the people I've spoken to since who received that letter that did get legal advice, their legal advisors agree with us. Okay. And there is a safety decision made all the time within a public company. Qantas, Virgin, any of them do not put their overwhelming resources into safety. If there is almost, dare I say it, the dreaded affordable safety. If they put everything they made into safety, whether it be replacing crew, whether it be training, new aircraft, whatever, then they wouldn't make a profit. And they would return nothing to the shareholders. So the fact that they do return something says to me that somewhere in the organisation, someone is making a decision on how much is spent on safety on an ongoing basis. And to me, that's the CEO.
And up until now, that's been a very successful, particularly in jet aircraft over 57,000 kilos, that's been a very successful environment. So it's worked. What I'm concerned about, though, is that tension between the monetary CEO, the shareholders' return, and safety. And you've mentioned Tiger twice now, and up until the unbelievable event of 28th October, that had been the only time an airline had been grounded wholly. And can you explain the protocol of how that works? I asked it of Virgin. In the event of a serious safety event or issue, can you describe the protocol which should take place should the CEO decide to ground the fleet, nationally and internationally? Is there a protocol? Are you part of that protocol?
Well, if someone was to ask our opinion, then we would give our opinion. If they asked our advice, we would give our advice. But the AOC responsible person, and let's say that it is, say, the Group Executive of Operations or something that's been delegated from the CEO, that person is responsible to ensure that all their operations are safe. If they decide, the responsible person decides that it's not safe or there are risks which they cannot mitigate sufficiently to give them confidence that the operation remains safe, and they ground the airline. Reality, from my point of view, what else could I ask? I can't tell them to keep flying. I can't take on the liability for keeping flying to the Commonwealth by me telling someone who is an ASC holder, has a safety management system, is responsible for his own organisation, that I think he's wrong and he should continue to fly, if he doesn't ask my opinion.
But my recollection of the Tiger, just the media anyway, was that it was on your advice that they grounded their fleet.
The Tiger was different to the 28th of October. We grounded Tiger. On the 28th of October, Qantas grounded themselves.
Did you do that, or did you get their officer to ground the planes?
No, we grounded them.
So you said, bang, that's it, you're not flying. And they breached enough to incur that action.
We had no confidence that they were maintaining a safe enough standard for the Australian public.
Okay, excellent. So there is no protocol around all of this. It's just someone in the licence, the appropriately authorised person decides on safety to ground the fleet.
If an air operator certificate holder says, I'm going to ground my fleet because there are safety reasons that I don't think I can manage these risks, then I'm not in a position to say that's not a decision that's available to you. nor am I in a position to say that is totally unreasonable, because I may not have all the facts that they have. I do not know the culture of the organisation. I do not know what's been happening. But one thing I can say, and what we did say in the instance case of Qantas, is that if you've said to me on a Saturday afternoon or a Saturday evening that you're going to ground the airline because of the following risks that you don't think you've mitigated, well then before you can say, oh, we're going to go flying again, you've got to show me that you've now addressed those risks. Otherwise it's a nonsense, which is why we required Qantas to give us a safety case to go back flying again.
Okay. So, I mean, the elephant in the room is Qantas. So when did they notify you that they were ceasing operations?
I found out about the impending lockout and the grounding of the aircraft around 1 o'clock or so on the afternoon of the Saturday. From Mr Murdoch, I might add. That's not me passing it to Mr Murdoch, but I didn't actually hear from Qantas to start with.
The plot thickens. Where do you fit into this, Mr Murdoch?
Senator, just to reaffirm, I advised Mr McCormick. I was advised, and the Australian government's made clear its timetable with advice. We were advised around shortly after 1:30 p.m. on that Saturday afternoon. Formally, I advised Mr McCormick informally shortly afterwards. I contacted a number of senior people across the Australian government who needed to be aware of that action. When the Minister's outlined this in his statements to the Parliament, when the Minister did have a formal conversation with Mr Joyce after 2 p.m. on a Saturday, then Mr McCormick and I had a series of conversations from there on, as I did with other senior officers of the Commonwealth, to manage the situation from there on. So I was certainly advised around just after 1:30 p.m.
So can I just before we do go, Senator Gallagher, for the purposes of recording what's said accurately, Mr McCormack, you might just want to change your time so you don't get jumped on by someone out there listening that you heard half hour before Mr Murdoch.
Sorry, I'm on Queensland time in Brisbane here, so it's after...
That's usually my excuse, being 3 hours behind. Right, okay, so it's all clear. Mr Murdoch...
I was in Canberra, Mr McCormick's in Brisbane. So.
I'm sure if I didn't raise that, someone would have... Okay, thank you.
So the situation is that our regulator, who monitors our AOC holders and has the power to take action in the event of issues arising of serious nature, it's not required anywhere that you be notified prior to the decision being made.
A grounding decision?
A grounding decision. No one has to notify you. You're just like a member of the public queuing up to get on the plane.
No, they don't have to notify us, Senator, unless the grounds that have led them to ground that are a reportable matter.
Are an important
matter? A reportable matter.
A reportable matter.
Such as if they've had a serious incident or something's happened, they can't just ring us and say, oh, excuse me, I'm just grounded the airline without giving us the background to that.
Okay. I've been a student of the aviation industry for a reasonable amount of time, and the only similar sort of thing that I can recall outside the Tiger is the grounding of the 767s with answer to Easter and Christmas, which were maintenance-related issues, as I understand it.
Was that last century?
Well, it was a fair while ago.
Okay.
So, in that circumstance, was it CASA or a previous organisation that took the action to ground those planes?
I wasn't in Australia actually when this happened, Senator. I don't know. We'll take that on notice if we could, but I don't think any of us acted.
Okay. Well, the same 767s are probably still flying around the Qantas fleet. I was just curious about that. My next question really is, what credence or what value do you place as an organisation on the age of aircraft? If I do a study on planespotters.com, I can get the average age of every aircraft or every operator that comes in and out of Australia. And what stands out to me is that Qantas is 11.9 or 12, which is 3 times the age of Jetstar, twice the age of Virgin. If you look at Singapore Airlines, they're twice as old as Singapore Airlines. You can go through the whole list, and all of those operators have an average age of their fleet, and I understand that's made up of old and new aircraft. But Qantas domestically, and take out the A380s, it is an ancient fleet. is a very old fleet in the marketplace. Does that have any cause for concern with CASA? I mean, does a 22-year-old plane present a bigger safety risk than a 2-year-old plane?
Ageing aircraft is an issue, and in fact we have an ageing aircraft program which is run in the Middle East, mainly targeted at the small end of town, like GA aeroplanes, the commuter aeroplanes, where they tend to be even older than the Qantas aircraft. I think their fleet average age is between 30 and 40 years old.
Jet aircraft.
Yeah, at the large end, the high capacity RPT end, every manufacturer, the original equipment manufacturer of aircraft, does have an ageing aircraft program. As the aircraft ages, it requires more inspections. It generally incurs more airworthiness directives, as they're called, eventually, which are expensive items generally. So there comes a natural point where the fleet has to be rolled out anyway, apart from commercial aspects of market appeal, customer satisfaction and all those other things that drive it. Once the aircraft do start to age, generally speaking, competitive airlines will move the aircraft out before it becomes of such an age that we have serious concerns about the aircraft, because they just will not be viable to keep flying.
Competitive airlines. You're suggesting Qantas is not competitive?
It is my firm hope that Qantas is competitive.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, on
Thanks,
the Gallant. No, cut you off. Okay. But on the 767s, does anyone at the table, McCormick, know when the age of the 767 becomes a real issue for CASA?
The actual years of the aircraft are one measure. The other measures are on the number of times the aircraft's taken off and landed, on cycles, on pressurisation, total hours on components. There's more than just the physical age. It depends how hard the aircraft's been worked. I don't have the specific details of the 76, but if you have any specific questions about it, Chair, we'll be more than happy to answer on notice.
We appreciate that, Mr. McCormick, because I'm not one for keen for taking on notice all the time and bombarding you with, time-consuming, useless information, but we will take that offer up. Thank you.
So, if I just return to the Qantas shutdown, I mean, what I've read and the information that seems to present itself to me is that Qantas made a decision to lock out its workforce. Their holder of their AOC then decided that there may be some safety implications with that and decided to ground the fleet. Is that the guts of it?
That's basically it. I think it's fair to say, as I said, and for clarity, it was around 1:30 or after 1 o'clock that I spoke to Mr. Murdoch. I spoke to Mr. Stranby and to Mr. Joyce in Qantas repeatedly during the afternoon, and what I requested from them was their safety case of how they had come to reach this conclusion. For the reasons I just outlined a couple of minutes ago. I did receive one safety case, but it was not about the issues that led them to ground the aircraft. It was about a maintenance issue which had occurred a couple of days previously in Brisbane, which is a matter of possible unexplained damage to an aircraft.
We've seen that report.
That matter is under active investigation by the AFP, so I prefer not to comment too much more about that. As Mr. Murdoch said, we did not receive the safety case that led to their conclusion of grounding until 18:04 that evening. But Mr. Joyce, in his speech, if you don't mind quoted, says that it bears repeating that the specific driver for immediate ground of the airline was not related to the airline and fleet health metrics, but rather to the potential human factor threats that might be generated in response to the company announcement of lockout. The grounding, which occurred coincident with the announcement to lockout, was a conservative measure taken to mitigate a potential increase to risk. I took that as the definitive explanation of how they'd got to the conclusion, and that was in his 5 o'clock speech announcing this. The basic issue is that the airline had decided to...
What I suppose I'm trying to get to is, so the fact that the government acted quickly, it went to the Industrial Relations Commission, it was terminated, then they didn't have to run a safety case against you to get it back in the air. They just said that's removed. People were threatened with a lockout. We grounded the fleet. Everybody's back at work. Safety issue's gone. Is that how it works?
No, basically, what happened, Senator, is that once they did give us that safety case on Saturday night, I formed two teams, one to look at that safety case, purely so we could distill out of it what were the reasons why they were not flying. Not to Monday morning quarterback, as they say, the decision so much, but it's inevitable you will do that a little bit. And the second team was to look at the safety case when they were resumed flight. And And I think we all agree that the government's action was very timely and certainly led to a quick resolution, which is good. At about 3:40 a.m. On Sunday morning, I sent an email after the Fair Work Australia decision, I sent an email to Qantas allowing them to position aircraft because obviously when they grounded it, the fleet may not be in the positions to resume the services the next day on a limited basis until we receive their safety case. We received their safety case, I think the Minister said in Parliament at 10:23 the next morning. We assessed that through most of the day. We had some questions that were outstanding, but the questions we had were not determinative of the outcome. So once we had established that the safety case was okay, we'd finished that by 3:30 in the afternoon, we said, okay, you can resume flying.
Just for Senator Gallagher's question, so in relation to your first team that looked at the reasons Qantas gave in terms of safety why they needed to ground the airline, did you form a conclusion as to whether those reasons were justified?
We looked at it from the point of view that the safety case may not have contained all the information that Qantas had available to them. So it was difficult to be definitive. Could the safety case have been perhaps bigger, perhaps contain more information? Certainly it could be more fulsome. However, that decision, given that Qantas has a track record of conservative operations, conservative decisions, as they did with the volcanic ash, as I think they've mentioned here already when they stopped operating, that decision was a decision that was reasonably available to them.
Point of order. It's very interesting, but I'm not actually quite sure where this line of questioning is going in terms of the actual inquiry.
Well, I'll help you out, Senator Fawcett, because if you check the terms of reference, you'll see all related matters. So that may assist you. Keep going.
So I just want to clarify this. I understand what you said about Qantas's conservatism with the volcanic ash, which is, I think, when it comes to safety, having that approach is of course welcomed by all. But are you saying that you didn't form a conclusion as to the material that was provided to you for Qantas' safety case? In other words, is it fair to say you didn't necessarily agree with, or you didn't come to a conclusion, you relied on Qantas? It was an ipso facto thing that Qantas grounded the airline on safety reasons, therefore it must be a valid safety reason, rather than coming to an independent conclusion based on the evidence provided to you.
It was not possible for me to come to an independent conclusion unless I was assured or I had some confidence that I had all the information that was available to Qantas.
Okay, and you didn't have all the information that was available?
I do not think the safety case contained all the information that was available to Qantas. As far as Qantas saying, we've grounded the airline, or I'm going to ground the airline as the AOC holder because of risk X, Y, Z or whatever, once they've taken that decision, in a lot of ways it doesn't matter what I think. It matters a lot of what I think before I can go flying again. But the decision that they've taken was one that was available to them.
But it might matter, I think, to many in the Australian public who trust CASA, that if a company grounds an airline where there isn't a legitimate safety reason, you as the premier regulator in this country on safety issues, we would rely on you to say, well, that was a genuine reason, or it wasn't a genuine reason, genuine basis for grounding.
I certainly can make the former, but I don't think I can make the latter.
Okay.
Senator Gallagher.
Could I just, I did put a question on notice to both Qantas and yourself, and it was just to get an idea. Most of the intent to take Senator Fawcett's point is that we're talking about maintaining maintenance in Australia and whether that could be legislated and mandated. So I had a browse at the Flight Safety Australia magazine, and I just picked 1 August to 15 September, and I asked both Qantas and yourselves, I think the Secretariat will confirm that they were conveyed in writing, to just see out of the 60-odd reports over 57,000 kilo, how many were Qantas aircraft. And the point of the inquiry, I suppose, from my point of view, is that just a normal month's work? I mean, is that what happens, or is there anything unusual? So I was trying to sort of get to the stage where, has there been a pattern of maintenance problems, or are we just in business as usual in Australia, having regard to your, you've got a commercial imperative, you've got to make some money, and you've got to be safe. I mean, are we in the normal paradigm with those reports?
I think we've answered that question, Senator. I may not have got back to you yet. From memory, it was
If I may, Senator, in the STR system, which is the service difficulty reports, from the 1st of August to the 15th of September, for aircraft over 5,700 kilos, there were 135 STRs and 64 of those were from Qantas. We find that's not unusual. Qantas have a good reporting culture in the STR system, and of course they have more aircraft than any other airline in Australia.
So it's just normal business?
It's normal business. We do investigate these too, and what we do in the magazine is we try to pick ones which are of interest to both to the public and to the aviation industry.
I think there was one there where a contractor may have left a wheel changing implement. An outsourced contractor may have left a wheel changing implement close to some place that caused a problem.
All right, well, no, thanks for that.
Your specific question there on that 60-odd, the number's in the 30s, but the written answer is on its way back to you.
Okay, thank you.
About half, bit over half.
Okay. Well, I think that's about all my questions, I think.
Okay, well, I will do the round, and I'm mindful that I've said to the Hansard and Broadcasting staff that this will be wrapped up by 7:30, so I'm in trouble already, but if there is a burning question, please, Senator Xenophon.
Look, I just want to get, and I'd be grateful if you could perhaps take this on notice so there can be a considered approach. You had, for instance, some who've done some involved in maintenance, and Mr. Sandlands today in his plain talking have been quite critical of CASA, saying that you should have used your discretion for Qantas not to operate unmodified RB211 engines on 747s across remote routes. Could you just outline, perhaps on notice, what the protocols are, to give assurance that in terms of that safety standards are paramount in terms of dealing with this? I think Mr. Sandlands was critical of international standards being adopted, which he says aren't as good as the standards that Qantas used to have. Again, I think that's a fair summary of his complaint.
Well, Senator, we will look at that. I think, with all due respect to Mr. Sandlands, it's pretty easy to make those sort of statements. I pull them out of the air.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to put it in context. What are the protocols so that there can be an appropriate response to that? Thank you.
Okay, is there any further questions? Since there's no... Okay, on that, Mr. Murdoch and Mr. McCormick, thank you very much. Before you do run away, may I take this opportunity on behalf of the RAC Committee to sincerely wish you and your families and all the officers and staff back there in Department Land all the very best for Christmas. It is our second last sitting period, and we will look forward to seeing you all in the new year. Thank you very much. To our long-suffering Hansard and broadcasting staff, thank you kindly for your patience. Merry Christmas. And to Jeanette and her wonderful crew at the RAC Committee, we do sincerely thank you. Have a wonderful break. My fellow colleagues, happy Christmas. That concludes today's hearing. The committee now stands adjourned. Thank you. Don't go away.